The ultrasound monitor went dark. Victoria Hayes, CEO of one of Manhattan's most powerful investment firms, gripped the examination table as crimson pooled beneath her. Daniel Brooks, her senior analyst, her secret, the father of her unborn child, stood frozen in the doorway, watching the woman who commanded boardrooms reduce to trembling silence. The doctor's voice cut through the sterile air. "We need to operate. Now." This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to them. Not like this. 3 months ago, they were strangers in adjacent hotel rooms. Now they were losing everything neither knew they wanted, until it was slipping away. Before we dive into this story, I want to invite you to join me on this emotional journey. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The February rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Victoria Hayes' corner office on the 38th floor of the Meridian Tower. Daniel Brooks stood before her desk, his reflection ghosting across the glass that overlooked the Manhattan skyline, and wondered if this was the day his carefully reconstructed life would finally collapse. "Close the door," Victoria said without looking up from her tablet. Daniel's hand hesitated on the chrome handle. In the 18 months he'd worked at Hayes Capital Management, Victoria had never asked him to close the door. Public praise in team meetings, yes. Brutal corrections in open-plan areas, absolutely. But private audiences, those were reserved for terminations or promotions, and Daniel wasn't sure which terrified him more. The door clicked shut with a finality that made his chest tighten. Victoria set down her tablet with deliberate care. She was 42, 12 years his senior, and possessed the kind of controlled elegance that made boardrooms fall silent when she entered. Today, however, something was different. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she folded them on the desk. The perfectly applied makeup couldn't quite hide the exhaustion beneath her eyes. "Sit down, Daniel." He sat, his mind racing through every project, every analysis, every interaction of the past 3 months, ever since the Chicago conference, ever since that night they'd both agreed to forget. "I need to tell you something," Victoria began, and the careful composure in her voice made every nerve in Daniel's body go rigid. "And I need you to let me finish before you respond." The rain intensified, drowning out the ambient noise of the city below. "I'm pregnant." Her gray eyes met his directly, unflinching despite the tremor in her jaw. "It's yours." The world tilted. Daniel heard the words, recognized each one individually, but his brain refused to assemble them into meaning. Pregnant. Yours. 2 words that obliterated the careful boundaries he'd spent 2 years building after Sarah's death. "I know what we agreed," Victoria continued, her voice steady now, as if she were presenting quarterly projections rather than detonating both their lives. "Chicago was a mistake. We were exhausted, we were honest with each other for 5 minutes, and we made a choice neither of us should have made. I'm not here to relitigate that." Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. His mind was spinning backward to that November night, the conference that had run 14 hours straight, the hotel bar where they'd both ended up at midnight, too wired to sleep. They'd talked about things they never discussed in the office. Victoria had mentioned her ex-husband's betrayal 7 years ago, how she'd channeled that pain into building an empire. Daniel had found himself confessing how some mornings he still reached for his wife before remembering she was gone. Exhaustion had stripped away their professional armor. Honesty had led to recognition. 2 people who understood survival. And survival had led to a hotel room where loneliness and attraction had briefly felt like connection. "I'm telling you as a courtesy," Victoria said, pulling him back to the present. "Not because I expect anything. I'm 42 years old. I built this company from nothing. I can handle this alone." The words landed like a challenge, but Daniel heard the fear beneath them. The same fear he'd felt 2 years ago when the hospital chaplain had approached him with that terrible expression. "How long have you known?" His voice sounded distant, hollow. 3 weeks. I'm almost 12 weeks along." Victoria's fingers interlaced tighter. "I've had time to think through the implications. I don't want to disrupt your life, Daniel. You have Lily to think about. You've been through enough." The mention of his daughter snapped something into focus. Lily. 8 years old, brilliant and fragile, still processing the loss of her mother. How would he explain this? But beneath the panic, something else stirred. something Daniel hadn't felt since Sarah's funeral, a pull toward the future instead of away from it. "No," he said quietly. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "No? No child of mine grows up without a father." The words came out with more force than he'd intended. "I don't care what's convenient or what's complicated. That's my line." For the first time since he'd known her, Victoria Hayes looked genuinely surprised. "Daniel, you don't have to. I'm not doing this out of obligation." He leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. "You can build a company from nothing. You can command a boardroom, but you can't tell me I don't get to show up for my own child." The silence that followed was different from before. Not empty, but full of something neither of them had words for yet. Victoria's carefully maintained expression cracked, just slightly. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," Daniel admitted. "But I know how to show up, and I know what it costs a kid when a parent doesn't." The rain eased, leaving only the quiet hum of the city below. "This changes everything," Victoria said, but it sounded less like a warning and more like a statement of fact they both needed to acknowledge. "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "It does." That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table long after Lily had gone to bed, staring at his phone. The apartment was too quiet, the way it always was after his daughter's laughter faded into sleep. He'd moved here 6 months after Sarah's death, couldn't bear the old house with its memories and empty spaces. The new place was smaller, cleaner, deliberately minimalist. Lily had her own room decorated with her art projects and the stars they'd painted on the ceiling together. Daniel's room was just a place to sleep. The living room was where they built pillow forts and did homework. The kitchen was where he'd learned to make pancakes that didn't taste like grief. He'd rebuilt his life one small, deliberate choice at a time. And now, in one conversation, the foundation had shifted beneath him. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. "I know this is overwhelming. Take whatever time you need to process." Daniel typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, "When's your next doctor's appointment?" The reply came immediately. "Thursday, 2 p.m. You don't have to. I'll be there." A longer pause this time. Then, "Okay." He set the phone down and walked to Lily's room. She was asleep, her dark hair spread across the pillow, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant that had been Sarah's last gift. At 8 years old, she'd already learned that the world could take people away without warning. How could he explain that the world was about to give them someone new? The next morning, Daniel dropped Lily off at school and watched her disappear into the building with her best friend Emma, their animated conversation about some book series carrying back to him on the cold March wind. She seemed lighter lately, more like the kid she'd been before cancer had stolen her mother over 18 brutal months. He couldn't risk breaking her open again. But he also couldn't model running from responsibility. Sarah had taught him that, had lived it through every excruciating treatment, every moment she'd fought to stay present for Lily, even when her body was failing. "What would you tell me to do?" he thought, the question he'd asked 1,000 times to silence. At the office, Daniel moved through meetings on autopilot, his mind fractured between analysis and impossibility. He caught Victoria's eye twice across the conference room during the morning strategy session. She was presenting the Q1 projections with her characteristic precision, giving no indication that anything had changed. But he noticed things he'd never paid attention to before, how she touched her stomach briefly when she thought no one was looking, how she'd switched from coffee to water, how she'd excused herself twice during the 3-hour meeting. After the session ended, their colleague Marcus caught Daniel's arm in the hallway. "You okay, man? You seemed somewhere else today." "Just tired," Daniel lied. "Lily had a rough night." Marcus nodded sympathetically. He'd been one of the few colleagues who'd known Sarah, who'd attended the funeral, who still asked about Lily. Kids that age, they process things in waves. "How's she doing overall?" "Better," Daniel said, and it was true. "She's reading again, laughing more. It's like watching someone come back to life." "That's good. That's really good." Marcus hesitated. "Listen, I know it's been tough. If you ever need to talk..." "Thanks, Marcus." Daniel forced a smile. "I appreciate it." But as he walked back to his desk, Daniel realized he couldn't talk to anyone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. This wasn't something you workshop with colleagues. This was something you carried until it became clear what shape it needed to take. Thursday arrived too quickly. Daniel told his team he had a dentist appointment and left the office at 1:30. Victoria had texted him the address of her OB's office in Midtown, not the concierge medical practice where company executives typically went, but a regular clinic where anonymity was easier to maintain. He found her in the waiting room, dressed down in jeans and a sweater that somehow made her look younger and more vulnerable. She glanced up from her phone, and Daniel saw the relief flash across her face before she could hide it. "You came," she said quietly. "I said I would." They sat in awkward silence while other couples around them chatted easily, comfortable in the shared knowledge of what they were doing there. Daniel and Victoria were separate islands in that sea of casual intimacy, connected by biology and one night of monumental poor judgment. "Victoria Hayes?" A nurse appeared in the doorway. They stood simultaneously, and Victoria hesitated before walking toward the nurse. Daniel followed, acutely aware that he had no idea what he was supposed to do or say or be in this situation. The examination room was small and ruthlessly cheerful. Pastel paintings of peaceful landscapes, a poster explaining fetal development, the standard exam table with its sanitary paper. Dr. Chen entered with a warm smile that included both of them without judgment. "Good to see you again, Victoria. And you must be Daniel." "Yes." He shook her hand, grateful for the matter-of-fact professionalism. "First ultrasound today," Dr. Chen said, pulling up Victoria's chart on the computer. "Everything's been progressing well from the blood work. Let's take a look at this baby." Victoria lay back on the table, and Daniel stood awkwardly to the side until Dr. Chen gestured him closer. "You can stand there, Dad. You'll want to see this." Dad. The word hit him like a physical thing. Doctor. Chen applied gel to Victoria's abdomen and positioned the ultrasound wand. The monitor flickered to life with incomprehensible gray and black patterns. Then suddenly, impossibly, there was a shape. Something small and impossibly human, curled in a space Daniel's brain couldn't quite process as real. "There we are," Dr. Chen said, adjusting the image. "Measuring right on track for 12 weeks. And there's the heartbeat." A rapid fluttering filled the room, quick and strong and undeniable. Daniel forgot how to breathe. That sound, that impossible perfect rhythm, was life. His child's life, real in a way that all the words and implications hadn't been until this exact moment. He looked at Victoria and saw tears streaming silently down her face, her eyes fixed on the monitor with an expression of wonder and terror. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. Her fingers closed around his like a lifeline. "Everything looks healthy, Doctor." Chen continued, taking measurements, pointing out features that Daniel couldn't quite track because his entire consciousness had narrowed to that heartbeat. Strong cardiac activity, good growth, no concerns at this stage. Can you tell?" Victoria's voice caught. "Too early to determine sex yet," Dr. Chen said kindly. "We can check at the 20-week anatomy scan if you want to know." Victoria nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Chen printed several images and handed them to Victoria. "I'll see you in 4 weeks. In the meantime, continue the prenatal vitamins, stay hydrated, and call if you have any concerning symptoms. Some fatigue is normal, but if you experience severe cramping or bleeding, I want to know immediately." They walked out of the clinic in silence, both clutching copies of the ultrasound images. On the sidewalk, the March afternoon felt surreal. All these people rushing past, completely unaware that Daniel's entire understanding of his future had just reformed around a grainy black and white image. "I need coffee," Victoria said, then immediately corrected herself. "Tea. I need tea." They found a quiet cafe 2 blocks away and sat by the window. Victoria ordered chamomile. Daniel got black coffee he didn't want, just to have something to hold. "That was real," Victoria said finally, staring at the ultrasound picture. "I mean, I knew it was real, but yeah." Daniel understood exactly what she meant. "I built a company," Victoria continued, her voice low and intense. "I've managed billions in assets. I've negotiated with people who could buy and sell countries, and I have no idea how to do this." "I was terrified with Lily," Daniel admitted. "Sarah and I had been married 3 years. We'd planned the pregnancy. We'd read all the books. And when they put her in my arms, I was absolutely certain I was going to break something." Victoria looked up. "What changed?" "Nothing. The fear never goes away. You just learned to act anyway. He paused. Sarah used to say that parenting is just showing up scared every single day and trying not to let them see it. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was. Daniel stared at his coffee. She would have known what to do about all of this. How to tell Lily. How to make it make sense. How are you going to tell her? Honestly, that's the only way I know how to do anything with Lily now. She's seen too much to accept anything less than the truth. Victoria's fingers traced the edge of her teacup. This is going to get complicated. At work, I mean. People will figure it out eventually. Let them. She looked surprised. That's easy for you to say. You're not the CEO. No, but I'm not ashamed of this either. Daniel met her eyes steadily. Are you? I'm terrified, Victoria said bluntly. Not of what people will think. Of failing. Of being the parent who's too focused on work to show up. Of becoming my mother. It was the most vulnerable thing he'd heard her say, more intimate than anything that had happened in Chicago. Then don't, Daniel said simply. Show up scared. That's what I'm planning to do. A small, exhausted laugh escaped Victoria. Is it always going to feel this overwhelming? Probably. But it gets more familiar. The fear becomes part of the routine. They sat in silence for a while, watching people pass by outside. Parents pushing strollers, couples walking dogs, a teenager arguing with someone on his phone. Normal life, continuing unaware. I should get back to the office, Victoria said eventually, though she didn't move. Me too. Daniel didn't move either. Daniel, Victoria's voice was careful. I meant what I said. I don't expect anything from you beyond what you're willing to give. We don't have to be anything. We can co-parent. Keep it professional. Is that what you want? She looked down at the ultrasound picture. I don't know what I want. I've spent 20 years knowing exactly what I want, and now everything's uncertain. Okay, Daniel said. Then we figure it out as we go. No expectations except showing up. Showing up scared, Victoria repeated, like she was testing out the concept. It's the only way I know how to do this. They finished their tea and coffee in silence, then walked back toward the office together. As they approached the Meridian Tower, Victoria stopped. Thank you, she said quietly, for coming today. For not running. I told you, not my style. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but a softening of the careful guard she always maintained. I'm beginning to see that. They took separate elevators back to the 38th floor, maintaining the fiction that nothing had changed. But Daniel felt the weight of the ultrasound picture in his jacket pocket like a physical thing, evidence that everything had changed, that his life had just expanded in a direction he'd never imagined. That evening, after dinner, Daniel found Lily curled up on the couch with her current book, completely absorbed. She looked so much like Sarah in those moments, the same intense focus, the same habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she read. Lil, he said, sitting down beside her. I need to talk to you about something important. She marked her page and looked up, immediately alert. 2 years had taught her that something important could mean anything from we're out of your favorite cereal to mom's gone. It's not bad, Daniel said quickly, recognizing the flash of fear in her eyes. I mean, it's not bad, it's just big and complicated. And I need you to listen before you react, okay? Lily set her book aside completely, her expression serious. Okay, Dad. Daniel took a breath. Honesty, that was all he had. Remember my boss, Victoria, Ms. Hayes? The scary lady you said is actually nice? She's not scary, she's just focused. But yes, that Victoria. He paused, trying to find words that were honest without being overwhelming. Something happened, and now Victoria is going to have a baby. And I'm going to be the baby's dad. Lily's eyes went very wide. Like, you and her are getting married? No, it's not like that. We're not together. We're not dating. But the baby is mine, which means I'm going to be a dad again, which means you're going to be a big sister. The silence that followed felt like it lasted hours. Is Mom going to be mad? Lily asked finally, her voice very small. Daniel's throat closed. Oh, sweetheart. He pulled Lily into his arms. Mom isn't here to be mad or not mad, but I don't think she would be. I think she'd understand that life keeps moving forward, even when we don't expect it to. Are you happy about the baby? Lily asked against his chest. Daniel thought about the heartbeat on the ultrasound monitor, the terror and wonder on Victoria's face, the strange sense that his life was finally moving forward instead of just surviving. I'm scared, he said honestly. But yeah, I think I'm happy. Is that okay? Lily pulled back to look at him, her face serious. If you're happy, I'm happy. That's what Mom would say. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just don't notice because you're old. Daniel laughed despite himself, and Lily grinned, a real one, not the careful smile she'd worn for months after Sarah's death. So when do I meet the baby? Lily asked. Not for a while. The baby's not born yet. Victoria's going to be pregnant for several more months. Can I help with baby stuff? Of course you can. But Lil, this is going to be different from how things were with you and Mom. Victoria and I aren't together like that. We're just two people who are going to be parents together. Lily considered this with the seriousness of someone who'd already learned that families came in unexpected shapes. Like Emma's parents? They're divorced, but they both come to her soccer games. Yeah, kind of like that. Except Victoria and I were never married. We're starting from a different place. Starting is good, Lily said firmly. Starting means it's not ending. Her wisdom caught him off guard, the way it so often did. She'd learned too young that endings were permanent, that some people didn't come back. The idea of a beginning, of something new rather than something lost, held a hope he hadn't expected. You're right, Daniel said softly. Starting is good. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and looked at the ultrasound picture again. That tiny, impossible person who was going to change everything. Again. His phone buzzed. Victoria. Did you tell Lily? Yeah, she took it better than I expected. Asked if she could help with baby stuff. She sounds remarkable. She is. Takes after her mom. A pause. Then, I keep looking at the ultrasound picture. It doesn't feel real yet. It will. Usually around 3 a.m. when they're screaming and you can't remember what sleep feels like. Looking forward to it already. Daniel smiled despite himself. There was something almost companionable about the exchange. Two people texting in separate apartments, both staring at the same impossible image, both terrified and committed in equal measure. We should probably figure out the practical stuff soon, Victoria texted. Living arrangements, financial responsibilities, custody schedules, or we could just figure out the next step. Then the one after that. That's not how I usually operate. I know, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to have all the answers right now. Another long pause. Then, showing up scared? Exactly. Okay. Next step. I have another appointment in 4 weeks. April 14th. I'll be there. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Victoria. Daniel set down his phone and looked around his small, carefully rebuilt life. The apartment that was just big enough for him and Lily. The kitchen where they'd learned to exist without Sarah. The living room where they'd built a new version of family from the ashes of the old one. And now it was all expanding again, reshaping around a person who didn't exist yet except as a heartbeat on a monitor and a grainy image on photo paper. He thought about Sarah, about the life they'd planned and lost, about the promise he had made at her funeral, to take care of Lily, to keep moving forward, to not let grief turn them both into ghosts. This wasn't what he'd imagined when he made that promise. But then, nothing about the past 2 years had been what he'd imagined. I don't know what I'm doing, he said to the empty kitchen, to Sarah's memory, to the universe that kept throwing impossible challenges his way. But I'm showing up. That has to count for something. The apartment didn't answer. But somewhere across the city, Victoria was probably sitting in her own space, having her own conversation with her own fears. Two separate people, connected by biology and choice, and a tiny person who would arrive in 6 months to make everything even more complicated. Daniel pulled out his phone one more time and texted Victoria. We're going to figure this out. Her response came immediately. I know we will. And somehow, despite everything, he believed it. Outside, the March rain started again, washing the city clean. Inside, Daniel sat with the ultrasound picture and let himself imagine a future that included something other than survival. a future with laughter and chaos, and a baby who would need him to show up scared every single day. He'd done it before. He could do it again. This time, he wouldn't be alone. The April appointment came with unseasonable warmth, the kind of false spring that made New Yorkers shed their winter coats prematurely. Daniel met Victoria in the same waiting room, but this time the silence between them felt less awkward and more companionable. She'd brought printouts of research articles about fetal development, naturally, and Daniel had downloaded 3 different pregnancy apps on his phone without telling her. "You look tired," Victoria said, studying him with the same analytical precision she applied to quarterly reports. "Lily had a nightmare. We were up until 4 talking about whether babies could remember being born." "Can they?" "According to my middle-of-the-night research, no. But try explaining that to an 8-year-old who's convinced she remembers being cold." A small smile touched Victoria's lips. "She's processing this in her own way." "Yeah." Yesterday, she asked if the baby would call her sister or if she needed a special title. She's leaning toward Supreme Elder Sibling. Victoria's smile widened into something genuine. "I like her already." Dr. Chen called them back, and this time Daniel didn't hesitate before following Victoria into the exam room. The routine was becoming familiar, the pleasantries, the check-in questions, the moment when Victoria lay back on the table and the ultrasound revealed their impossible reality. But today something was different. "Let me just—" Dr. Chen moved the wand, her expression shifting from routine to focused. She angled the screen away slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Victoria, when did you last feel movement?" "I haven't felt anything yet," Victoria said, tension creeping into her voice. "The book said that's normal until 18 to 20 weeks. "And you've had no cramping? No bleeding?" "No, nothing. What's wrong?" "Doctor." Chen didn't answer immediately, and Daniel felt his chest constrict. He'd seen that expression before, on the oncologist's face when Sarah's scans had come back with new tumors. The careful professionalism that meant everything was about to break. "The baby's measuring small," Dr. Chen said finally. "Significantly smaller than expected for 16 weeks, and the heart rate is lower than I'd like." Victoria's hand found Daniel's, her grip painful. "What does that mean?" "It could mean several things. Let me call in Dr. Reeves from Maternal Fetal Medicine. I want another opinion." The wait felt eternal. Daniel stood beside Victoria, their hands locked together, both of them staring at the frozen ultrasound image on the screen. That tiny person who'd seemed so perfect 4 weeks ago now looked fragile, concerning, at risk. "This is my fault," Victoria whispered. "I've been working 70-hour weeks. I haven't been sleeping enough." "Stop," Daniel said firmly. "You don't know that. We don't know anything yet." But fear had a logic all its own, and he could see it consuming her, the same way it had consumed him during Sarah's illness, the desperate need to find something to blame, some action that could rewrite the past. Dr. Reeves arrived with the calm authority of someone who'd delivered 1,000 difficult diagnoses. She introduced herself briefly, then took over the ultrasound without preamble. The room fell silent except for the clicking of keys as she took measurements, adjusted angles, studied the screen with an intensity that made Daniel's stomach turn. "There's fluid around the baby," Dr. Reeves said finally. "Not a dangerous amount yet, but it's indicative of stress. Combined with the size discrepancy and the heart rate, I'm concerned about placental insufficiency." "In English," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "The placenta isn't functioning optimally. The baby isn't getting everything it needs to grow." Dr. Reeves turned to face them directly. "Right now, the situation is manageable, but it requires immediate intervention. I want you on modified bed rest starting today. No work, minimal activity. We need to reduce stress and give your body the best chance to support this pregnancy." "I can't just stop working," Victoria said automatically. "I'm the CEO of—" "I understand, but right now you need to decide what your priority is." "Doctor." Reeves's tone wasn't unkind, but it was absolute. "You can keep pushing yourself and risk losing this baby, or you can step back and give it a fighting chance." The words hung in the air like a verdict. "How long?" Daniel asked when Victoria couldn't speak. "Minimum of 8 weeks. Possibly until delivery, depending on how things progress. We'll monitor weekly. If the situation deteriorates, we'll need to consider hospitalization." Victoria's face had gone pale. 8 weeks? That's until June. I have the Fordham merger, the international expansion, the Victoria. Daniel squeezed her hand. None of that matters if you lose the baby. She looked at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. Absolute terror barely contained beneath her professional veneer. I don't know how to not work. I've been running this company for 15 years. It's who I am. Then you figure out who you are without it, Dr. Reeves said bluntly. Because that baby needs you to be its mother more than Hayes Capital needs you to be its CEO. The words landed like a physical blow. Victoria closed her eyes, and Daniel watched her entire body tremble with the effort of not breaking down in front of strangers. They left the clinic with a stack of instructions, prescription orders, and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the next week. On the sidewalk, Victoria stood frozen, staring at the traffic rushing past as if she'd forgotten how to navigate the world outside her office. I need to go to work, she said finally. I need to delegate, restructure, set up protocols for… No. Daniel stepped in front of her, blocking her path toward the office. You heard what she said. No work. That means not today, not tonight, not this week. You don't understand. If I'm not there, if you're not there, the company will figure it out. That's what you pay your executives for. He softened his voice. Victoria, I've watched someone I love destroy herself trying to control the uncontrollable. Don't do this. Please. Something in his tone broke through her panic. She looked at him, really looked at him, and seemed to see the ghost of his past standing between them. What happened to your wife? She asked quietly. She tried to keep working through chemo, insisted she could handle it all, her job, Lily, the treatments. She burned herself out fighting on too many fronts. Daniel's throat tightened. By the time she admitted she needed to stop, it was too late. The stress had compromised her immune system. What might have been treatable became terminal. Victoria's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I'm so sorry. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because I can't watch someone else make the same mistake. He gestured toward the street, toward the office building visible in the distance. That company will survive without you for 8 weeks. That baby won't. The tears spilled over then, and Victoria pressed her hands to her face as if she could physically hold herself together. Daniel had seen her command boardrooms, demolish competitors, rebuild portfolios with surgical precision, but he'd never seen her cry. I don't know how to do this, she said through her hands. I don't know how to be the person who needs help. Then learn, starting right now. Daniel pulled out his phone. I'm calling you a car to take you home, and I'm coming with you to make sure you actually go there. You don't have to. I know. I'm doing it anyway. The car arrived 10 minutes later. Daniel gave the driver Victoria's address, a luxury high-rise in Tribeca that he'd only known from the company directory, and they rode in silence through midday traffic. Victoria stared out the window, her hands pressed protectively over her stomach. I'm terrified, she admitted as they crossed Canal Street. I know. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not capable of putting someone else first? You already are, Daniel said. You're in this car instead of at your desk. That's a start. Victoria's apartment was exactly what Daniel had imagined. Sleek, minimalist, expensive, and utterly impersonal. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson River. Modern furniture arranged with geometric precision. Art on the walls that looked important but felt cold. There were no photos, no personal touches, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here rather than occasionally stopping by between corporate conquests. I'm never here, Victoria said, reading his expression. I usually sleep at the office. Not anymore. He helped her settle on the pristine white couch, then explored the kitchen. The refrigerator contained bottled water, expired yogurt, and takeout containers that had probably been there for months. The pantry held protein bars and coffee pods, nothing remotely resembling actual food. When did you last eat something that wasn't delivered? Daniel called from the kitchen. I don't remember. He pulled out his phone and ordered groceries for delivery, then returned to find Victoria still sitting exactly where he'd left her, staring at her own phone with an expression of profound loss. I need to email my executive team, she said. Set up interim leadership protocols. There's the Fordham deal closing next month, and the international expansion requires… One email, Daniel interrupted. You can send one email saying you're taking medical leave and Jeffrey is acting CEO. That's it. Jeffrey isn't ready to… Then he'll learn. That's how leadership works. You're not the only person capable of running that company. Victoria looked up sharply. You have no idea what you're asking me to give up. You're right, I don't. But I know what it costs to lose a child. The words came out harder than he'd intended. Sarah and I had a son. Before Lily. He was stillborn at 32 weeks because Sarah refused to slow down, refused to acknowledge that something was wrong, refused to be anything other than the person she'd always been. The silence that followed was absolute. I didn't know, Victoria whispered. Nobody does. We don't talk about him, but I think about him every single day. Daniel sat down across from her, his hands clasped tightly together. I'm not going to let that happen again. So you can be angry at me, you can resent me for pushing, but I'm not backing down on this. Victoria set down her phone with trembling hands. What was his name? Ethan. The name felt like broken glass in his throat. We named him Ethan. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Just fight for this baby, even if it means letting go of everything else. She looked at him for a long moment, and Daniel saw the exact instant when her walls came down. When Victoria Hayes, the CEO, became Victoria, the terrified, expectant mother who had no idea how to navigate this unfamiliar territory. Okay, she said quietly. I'll send the email. She drafted it on her phone while Daniel watched. It was brief, professional, and completely unlike her usual detailed communications. 2 sentences. Effective immediately, I'm taking medical leave for personal health reasons. Jeffrey Kwan will serve as acting CEO until further notice. Send it, Daniel said when she hesitated. Victoria's finger hovered over the button. Then, with visible effort, she pressed send. The phone immediately started buzzing with responses. Victoria silenced it and set it face down on the coffee table. There, she said. Done. How do you feel? Terrified, unmoored, like I just jumped off a cliff without checking if there was water below. She looked at him. Is that normal? Completely. The grocery delivery arrived, and Daniel unpacked vegetables, proteins, grains, real food that required actual cooking. He made a simple pasta with vegetables while Victoria sat at the kitchen island and watched like she'd never seen anyone cook before. You do this every night? She asked as he chopped tomatoes. Most nights. Lily needs routine. Dinner together is part of that. My mother fed us takeout and frozen dinners. She was too busy building her real estate empire to cook. Is that why you and she don't speak? Victoria's expression shuddered. Among other reasons, she told me I was making a mistake building Hayes Capital, said I was too emotional to succeed in finance, that I'd fail within a year and come crawling back. How long has it been? 15 years. I haven't spoken to her since I signed the incorporation papers. Daniel slid a plate of pasta in front of her. Eat. Then you're going to take a nap. I don't nap. You do now. Doctor's orders. She took a bite and her eyes widened slightly. This is actually good. Don't sound so surprised. They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence. Afterward, Daniel cleaned up while Victoria made a few brief calls to her assistant, setting up protocols for urgent communications only. When she finally put down her phone, exhaustion had replaced the manic energy that usually propelled her through 18-hour days. I should let you get back to work, she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice, an unspoken plea for him not to leave her alone with the silence. I took the rest of the day off, Daniel lied. He'd actually blown through 3 meetings and ignored 14 messages from his team, but Victoria didn't need to know that. Besides, someone needs to make sure you actually rest. I'm not good at being taken care of. I noticed. Humor me anyway. Victoria settled on the couch with a blanket Daniel found in the hall closet. Within minutes, the exhaustion she'd been fighting for weeks claimed her completely. She fell asleep sitting up, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Daniel watched her for a moment, this woman who commanded billions but didn't know how to let herself be vulnerable. Then he pulled out his phone and texted Lily's after-school program coordinator that he'd be late for pickup. Marcus called 20 minutes later. Where are you? The Henderson presentation is in an hour. Family emergency. You'll have to cover for me. Is everything okay? It will be. I'll fill you in tomorrow. He hung up before Marcus could ask more questions. Outside the windows, the Hudson River reflected the afternoon sun, And somewhere across the city, Lily was probably arguing with Emma about whose turn it was to be the protagonist in their latest imaginary adventure. Normal life, continuing while Daniel sat in a stranger's apartment and watched over the fragile beginning of something he still didn't entirely understand. Victoria woke 2 hours later, disoriented and vulnerable in a way she clearly hated. Did I fall asleep? You needed it. She sat up, pushing hair out of her face. What time is it? 4:30. I need to pick up Lily soon. You've been here this whole time? Someone had to make sure you didn't sneak off to the office. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. You barely know me. Why are you doing this? Daniel considered several diplomatic answers before settling on the truth. Because nobody did it for Sarah. Everyone told her to rest, to take it easy, but nobody actually made sure she did. I watched her burn herself out because she couldn't ask for help, and I didn't know how to force her to accept it. He met Victoria's eyes. I'm not making that mistake again. I'm not your wife. No. But you're carrying my child, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you destroy yourself out of pride or fear or whatever's driving you to work yourself to death. Victoria pulled the blanket tighter around herself. You're incredibly stubborn. Lily tells me the same thing, usually right before she admits I'm right. I'm not admitting you're right. Not yet. She shook her head, but there was something almost affectionate in the gesture. You should go get your daughter. I'll be fine. Will you, or will you be back at your desk the minute I leave? I sent the email. I committed to this. Good. Then I'll check on you tomorrow. You don't have to. I know. I'm doing it anyway. Daniel stood, then hesitated. Victoria, I know this isn't what you planned. But you're not alone in this. You don't have to figure everything out by yourself. She looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with resentment, mixed with something that might have been hope. I've been alone for 15 years. I don't know how to be anything else. Then learn, starting now. He left before she could argue, but texted her from the elevator. Eat something for dinner. Real food, not protein bars. Her response came as he reached the lobby. Bossy. You have no idea. Lily was waiting on the steps of her school, her backpack covered in pins she'd collected from various museums. She brightened when she saw him. Dad, you're late. Emma and I were inventing theories about where you were. What'd you come up with? She thinks you were fighting crime. I think you were at a secret meeting with the president. Both wrong. I was making sure Victoria followed doctor's orders. Lily's expression shifted to serious concern. Is the baby okay? The baby needs Victoria to rest more, so I'm helping make sure she does. They walked toward the subway, Lily's hand in his, and she was quiet for longer than usual. Finally, as they descended the stairs to the platform, she asked, Dad, do you love Victoria? The question stopped him cold. Why would you ask that? Because you're taking care of her, like you took care of Mom. Daniel knelt down to his daughter's eye level. I care about Victoria because she's going to be the mother of your sibling, but it's different from how I loved your mom. This is complicated. Complicated how? Your mom and I built a life together over years. Victoria and I are building something different, a partnership around being parents. Does that make sense? Lily considered this with her characteristic seriousness. So you're like teammates instead of married people. Exactly like that. Okay, I was just checking. She paused. Emma says her dad has a girlfriend now. She says it's weird, but also kind of nice because everyone seems happier. How do you feel about that? I don't know. It made me think about you being alone all the time. Daniel's chest tightened. I'm not alone. I have you. That's not the same, Dad. I'm 8. You need a grown-up. Well, when did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just keep forgetting because you're old. He pulled her into a hug, this brilliant, perceptive child who'd had to grow up too fast. I love you. You know that? I know. Can we get pizza for dinner? Absolutely. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at his laptop and researched placental insufficiency until his eyes burned. The medical articles were dense and terrifying, full of statistics about preterm delivery, low birth weight, developmental delays. But they all agreed on one thing. Rest and reduced stress were the only interventions that might help. His phone buzzed. Victoria. I ate the leftover pasta. It was still good. Proud of you. Don't patronize me. Not patronizing. Genuinely proud. How do you feel? A longer pause, then scared, bored, restless. Like I'm going to climb out of my skin if I sit still for 8 more weeks. Welcome to bed rest. It's terrible. Did Sarah have to do this? Different situation, but yeah, toward the end, she hated every minute. How did she cope? Daniel thought about those final months. Sarah weak and frustrated, unable to do anything but wait. Books, TV shows she'd never had time for. I brought her things to organize because she needed to feel productive. Lily would do art projects in bed with her. I don't do art projects. No, but you could read all those business books you've been meaning to get to. Learn a language. Finally watch that series everyone talks about. That sounds mind-numbing. It is, but it's also how you keep a baby alive. Another pause. Thank you for today, for staying, for making me send the email. You're welcome. Daniel, I'm not good at needing people. I'm going to be difficult about this. I know, but I'm glad you're not letting me push you away. I won't. Get some sleep, Victoria. Good night. Daniel set down his phone and looked at the ultrasound picture he'd taped to the refrigerator. That tiny person who was already changing everything, demanding sacrifices from people who'd spent years building walls against vulnerability. The next morning, he arrived at Victoria's apartment at 8 with coffee for himself and herbal tea for her. She opened the door looking rumpled and uncertain, so different from the polished executive who commanded boardrooms. I told you that you didn't have to check on me, she said, but she stepped aside to let him in. And I told you I was doing it anyway. Have you eaten? Not yet. Then I'm making breakfast. He scrambled eggs while Victoria sat at the island and tried not to look like she was enjoying being taken care of. They ate together, and Daniel noticed how the silence between them had shifted from awkward to almost comfortable over the past few days. I have a meeting at 10, he said, finishing his coffee. But I'll come by this afternoon. Is there anything you need? I'm not an invalid. I know, but you're also not used to asking for help. So I'm asking for you. Is there anything you need? Victoria's expression softened slightly. Books. Real ones, not business manuals. Something to help me stop thinking about work. Fiction? I haven't read fiction since college. Then that's where we'll start. Daniel pulled out his phone and texted Lily. What books should someone read if they haven't read fiction in 20 years? The response came immediately. Harry Potter, obviously. Also Percy Jackson. Also anything by Rainbow Rowell. Is this for Victoria? Yes. Tell her I'll make her a list. He showed Victoria the exchange, and something in her expression cracked, a glimpse of vulnerability beneath the armor. Your daughter is determined to like me, Victoria said quietly. She's determined to like her sibling's mother. There's a difference. Is there? Maybe not to an 8-year-old. Daniel left shortly after, but not before extracting a promise from Victoria that she'd actually rest instead of working remotely. At the office, he fielded questions from his team about yesterday's disappearance, deflected Marcus's concerned inquiries, and tried to focus on analysis that suddenly felt distant and meaningless. His phone buzzed at lunch. Victoria, your daughter sent me a 14-book reading list with detailed annotations. She's terrifyingly thorough. She gets that from her mother. I ordered them all. They'll be here tomorrow. Good. Now rest. Stop telling me what to do. No. The week developed a rhythm. Daniel checked on Victoria every morning before work and every evening after picking up Lily. He brought groceries, cooked meals she actually ate, and made sure she wasn't secretly working from her laptop. Victoria fought him every step of the way, but Daniel noticed she was also starting to relax, sleeping more, reading the books Lily recommended, even watching some of the TV series he suggested. The follow-up appointment the next week showed minimal improvement. The baby was still measuring small, still at risk, but the situation hadn't deteriorated. Dr. Reeves extended the bed rest orders and increased the frequency of monitoring to twice weekly. This is going to be my life for months, Victoria said as they left the clinic, lying around being useless. You're not useless. You're keeping a baby alive. That's literally the most important job you've ever had. I built a billion-dollar company. And now you're building a person. Which do you think matters more? Victoria stopped walking and looked at him with an expression that held both frustration and something deeper. You're relentless. Yes, it's extremely annoying. I know. But also, she trailed off, searching for words. Also necessary. I would have gone back to work by now if you weren't forcing me to take this seriously. I know that too. They stood on the sidewalk while people rushed past them, everyone absorbed in their own urgent lives. Victoria looked tired, but less hollow than she had a week ago, as if rest and actual food were slowly rebuilding reserves she'd been burning for years. I don't know how to thank you, she said finally. You don't have to. This is what we do. We show up for each other. For the baby. Is it just for the baby? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to explore. I don't know, Daniel admitted. But does it matter? We're here. We're doing this. Let's figure out the rest as we go. Victoria nodded slowly, showing up scared. Exactly. His phone rang. Lily's school. I need to take this. Go. I'll get a car home. Daniel answered as Victoria walked away, and the principal's calm voice delivered news that sent ice through his veins. Mr. Brooks, Lily's had an incident. She's fine, but we need you to come in. She's asking for you. He found his daughter in the nurse's office 20 minutes later, her face blotchy from crying. Dad, what happened, sweetheart? The principal explained. A boy had made a comment about Lily's mother being dead. Lily had shoved him. There'd been a fight. Nothing serious, but the school had a zero-tolerance policy for physical altercations. I'm sorry, Lily sobbed against his chest. He said Mom didn't love us because she left, and I got so angry. Daniel's heart broke. Oh, Lil, he was wrong, so wrong. But you can't hit people. I know, I'm sorry. He took her home, called in sick for the afternoon, and they talked through the grief that still ambushed them both when they least expected it. By evening, Lily had calmed down, but Daniel felt hollowed out, reminded that the past never really left, that wounds could reopen without warning. Victoria texted that night, Is everything okay? You were supposed to check in. Lily had a rough day at school. I'm with her. What happened? He explained briefly, and Victoria's response surprised him. Being a parent is terrifying in ways I never imagined. How do you do this? Badly. But with love, that's all any of us can do. I'm not sure I know how. You'll learn, same way I did, by showing up scared and hoping love is enough. The conversation shifted something between them, made it less about obligation and more about shared understanding. They were both terrified, both fumbling towards something neither fully understood, both hoping that showing up would be enough. The weeks crawled by. Victoria read Lily's book recommendations and texted Daniel her reactions. Daniel brought dinners several nights a week, and sometimes Lily came with him. The three of them would sit in Victoria's sterile apartment and talk about books and school and everything except the terrifying medical reality they were navigating. Lily, in her infinite wisdom, decided Victoria needed to know about her mother. She was really brave, Lily explained one evening while Daniel was cleaning up dinner. Even when she was sick, she never acted scared around me. Dad says she was protecting me. That sounds like she loved you very much, Victoria said carefully. She did. Dad says she'd want him to be happy again. Lily looked between them with 8-year-old directness. I think she'd be okay with you. Lily, Daniel warned from the kitchen. What? I'm just saying. Victoria looked uncomfortable but not entirely displeased. That's very kind of you. I'm not being kind, I'm being practical. The baby's going to need parents who get along. Emma's parents fight all the time, and it makes everything terrible. We're not going to fight, Daniel said, returning with tea. Good. Because I'm going to be the best big sister ever, and I can't do that if everyone's being weird. Later, after Lily had fallen asleep on Victoria's couch watching a movie, Daniel carried her to the car. Victoria walked them to the door. Your daughter is extraordinary, she said quietly. She is. Are you okay? You look tired. I am tired. Tired of being still. Tired of waiting. Tired of being scared every second of every day. I know. How do you do it? How do you function when you're this terrified? Daniel looked at his sleeping daughter, then back at Victoria. You find something worth being terrified for. Then you show up anyway. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. What if I can't do this? You already are. He left her standing in the doorway and drove home through the quiet streets with Lily sleeping in the back seat and the weight of impossible responsibility pressing against his chest. Somewhere in the past month, this had stopped being about obligation and started being about something else, something he wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. That night he lay awake and thought about the strange architecture of the life he was building. A daughter who'd lost her mother, a baby who didn't exist yet, a woman who terrified and intrigued him in equal measure. None of it made sense. None of it was what he'd planned. But then, nothing in his life had gone according to plan since the day Sarah's doctor had used the word terminal. Maybe that was the point. Maybe life wasn't about plans. It was about showing up when everything went sideways and choosing to stay anyway. His phone buzzed. Victoria. I'm reading Harry Potter. Lily was right. It's wonderful. Told you. Thank you for everything. For not letting me run. For making me rest. For being here. Always. The word felt too big, too permanent, too much like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. But he sent it anyway because it was also true. Outside, May rain started to fall, and Daniel closed his eyes and let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were all going to be okay. The rain became Daniel's constant companion over the next 3 weeks. It fell in sheets against Victoria's windows while he cooked dinner in her kitchen, drummed against the windshield when he drove Lily to school, turned the city into something soft and blurred at the edges. May surrendered to June without ceremony, and the baby continued to grow slowly, precariously, but growing nonetheless. Victoria's twice-weekly appointments became the rhythm around which everything else organized itself. Daniel rearranged his schedule without explanation, deflected Marcus's increasingly pointed questions about his absences, and stopped pretending this was just about obligation. Somewhere between grocery runs and midnight texts about whether babies could hear music in the womb, something had shifted. The growth is still behind, Dr. Reeves said during the 24-week appointment, her tone carefully neutral. But it's consistent growth. The heart rate is stable. As long as we maintain the current protocol, I'm cautiously optimistic. Cautiously optimistic. The words felt like a gift after weeks of increasingly dire warnings. So I'm doing something right, Victoria asked, and Daniel heard the desperate need for validation in her voice. You're doing everything right, Dr. Reeves confirmed. The bed rest is working. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. In the car afterward, Victoria was uncharacteristically quiet. Daniel had learned to read her silences. This one was relief mixed with exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been holding their breath for too long. We're past viability, she said finally as they crossed Houston Street. If something happens now, the baby has a chance. Nothing's going to happen. You don't know that. No, Daniel admitted. But I choose to believe it anyway. That's all we've got. Belief and stubbornness. Victoria turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his chest tighten. When did you become the optimistic one? You lost your wife. You should be the cynic. I lost Sarah, but I gotta have her for 10 years. I got Lily. I got those moments. He kept his eyes on the road. Cynicism is easy. Hope takes work. I've never been good at hope. Then let me carry it for both of us. The words hung between them, more intimate than anything that had happened in Chicago. Victoria reached across the console and took his hand, her fingers cold despite the June heat. Okay, she whispered. Okay. They drove the rest of the way in silence, their hands linked, and Daniel felt the architecture of his life shifting again. Walls he'd built after Sarah's death developing cracks he wasn't sure he wanted to repair. That evening, he brought Lily with him to Victoria's apartment. His daughter had appointed herself Victoria's entertainment committee, arriving with a backpack full of books, art supplies, and increasingly elaborate theories about what the baby would be like. I think she's going to have your eyes, Lily announced, sprawling on Victoria's couch with the confidence of someone who'd decided this was now her second home. But Dad's stubbornness. We don't know it's a girl, Victoria said, but there was warmth in her voice that hadn't been there 2 months ago. It's definitely a girl, I can tell. How? Sister instinct. Emma says when her brother was born, she just knew. She said boys feel different. Daniel laughed from the kitchen where he was preparing pasta. That's not scientifically accurate, Lil. Science doesn't know everything, Dad. Sometimes you have to trust feelings. Victoria caught Daniel's eye, and something passed between them, a shared amusement that felt dangerously close to domesticity. He looked away first, focusing on the pasta with more attention than it required. After dinner, Lily convinced Victoria to let her paint her toenails, a surreal image that Daniel captured on his phone without thinking. Victoria Hayes, the woman who commanded billions, sitting cross-legged on her couch while an 8-year-old applied sparkly purple polish and narrated a complicated story about dragons. "You're good with her," Victoria said later, after Lily had fallen asleep mid-movie again. "She makes it easy." "No, I mean, you're present, you listen, you take her seriously even when she's talking nonsense about sister instincts and dragons. That's just parenting. My father never did that. He was always working, always distracted. Even when he was physically present, he wasn't really there." Victoria touched her stomach absently. "I'm terrified I'll be the same way." "You won't be." "How do you know?" Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, the woman who'd taken medical leave from the empire she'd built, who'd spent 8 weeks on bed rest without complaint, who'd read every parenting book he'd suggested and asked questions that revealed how desperately she wanted to get this right. "Because you're here," he said simply. "You chose the baby over everything else. That's not something a distracted parent does." Tears filled Victoria's eyes, and Daniel was learning that meant she was overwhelmed rather than sad. "I read somewhere that babies can feel stress in the womb. What if she can feel how scared I am? Then she'll learn that being scared doesn't mean you give up. That's not the worst lesson." Victoria wiped her eyes impatiently. "You have an answer for everything." "No, I'm just good at pretending I do." He carried Lily to the car while Victoria watched from the doorway, and when he came back up to say goodbye, she was still standing there. "Stay," she said quietly, "just for a little while. It gets too quiet here at night." Daniel knew he should say no. Knew that every moment he spent in this apartment was pulling him further into something complicated and undefined. But he also knew what it felt like to face the darkness alone. So he texted his neighbor to keep an ear out for Lily and followed Victoria back inside. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, a careful distance between them, and talked about nothing important: books, movies, the ridiculous emails Victoria still received from her executive team despite being on leave. Safe topics that required nothing from either of them. But eventually, inevitably, the conversation turned real. "I went to see my mother last week," Victoria said, staring at her hands. "First time in 15 years. Daniel went very still. "How did that go?" "Terribly, exactly as I expected." Victoria's laugh was bitter. She told me I was making a mistake, that having a baby would ruin my career, destroy everything I'd built, that I was being selfish and stupid. "What did you say?" I told her she was probably right, that I was making a mistake, but it was my mistake to make. Victoria looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then I told her that I didn't want my daughter to grow up feeling like I did, like love was conditional on achievement, that I was going to try to be different. That took courage. It took desperation. I needed to hear her say that I was making the right choice. Instead, she confirmed every fear I've ever had about myself. Victoria's voice cracked. "What if she's right? What if I can't do this? What if I'm too broken to be someone's mother?" Daniel moved closer without thinking, closing the distance between them. "You're not broken. You're scared. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." He took her hands, cold and trembling. "Broken people don't spend 8 weeks on bed rest for a baby they've never met. Broken people don't read parenting books at midnight. Broken people don't care this much." "I don't know how to care this much. It's terrifying." "I know, but you're doing it anyway. That's what matters." Victoria leaned into him then, her forehead resting against his shoulder, and Daniel wrapped his arms around her without hesitation. She felt fragile in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength, the fragility of someone who'd spent years building armor only to discover that love required being defenseless. "I can't lose this baby," she whispered against his chest. "I know we barely know each other. I know this is all backwards and impossible, but I can't lose her." "You won't." "You can't promise that." "No. But I can promise I'll be here. Whatever happens, you won't face it alone. They stayed like that for a long time, Victoria's breathing eventually slowing into something calmer. When Daniel finally left at midnight, he felt like he was leaving part of himself behind, a part he hadn't known he was ready to share. The next day brought a crisis that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. Daniel's boss called him into a closed-door meeting and delivered news that felt like the ground dropping away. "The board wants you on the Fordham merger team," Patricia said, her expression carefully neutral. "It's a career-making opportunity, but it means relocating to Chicago for 6 months starting in August." Daniel's mind went blank. Chicago, 6 months, starting 2 months before Victoria's due date. "I can't," he said automatically. Patricia's eyebrows rose. "This isn't optional, Daniel. This is the trajectory you've been building toward for 2 years. You turn this down, you're signaling you're not serious about advancement. I have personal obligations. We all do. That's what family leave and flexible arrangements are for." But there was no flexible arrangement that would let him be in Chicago while Victoria gave birth in New York. No family leave policy that covered being present for a child who wasn't even born yet, from a woman he wasn't married to. "I need to think about it," Daniel said, knowing it was the wrong answer but unable to commit to the right one. Patricia's expression softened slightly. "Daniel, I know things have been difficult since Sarah, but you can't put your career on hold indefinitely. At some point, you have to move forward." He left the meeting feeling like he'd been gutted. Moving forward. As if the past 2 months hadn't been exactly that, moving towards something new and terrifying and important. That evening, he went to Victoria's apartment earlier than usual and found her on the couch reading one of Lily's recommended books, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. "You're early," she said, smiling. Then she saw his face. "What's wrong?" He told her about Chicago, about the merger team, about the impossible choice that suddenly wasn't hypothetical anymore. Victoria set down her book with careful precision. "You should take it." "What?" "It's a career-making opportunity. You said so yourself." "I also said I'd be here, for you, for the baby." "You didn't sign up to sacrifice your entire career, Daniel. We'll figure something out. I can hire help, I can—" "Stop." He sat down heavily. "Just stop. I'm not leaving. You have to think about Lily, about your future, about—" "I am thinking about Lily. I'm thinking about the example I want to set for her. That when you make a commitment to someone, you keep it, even when it's hard." Victoria's hands went to her stomach protectively. "I don't want to be the reason you resent your life." "You think I'd resent being here for my daughter's birth? For the first months of her life? You keep calling the baby her." Lily's convinced. It's rubbing off. Despite everything, Victoria smiled, but it faded quickly. "Daniel, be practical. This is your career, your advancement, my choice," he interrupted, "and I'm choosing to stay." "That's insane." "Probably, but I watched Sarah choose her career over her health, and it killed her. I'm not making that mistake in reverse." The words landed harder than he'd intended. Victoria went pale, her hands trembling. "I'm not Sarah," she said quietly. "I know, but I'm still the same person who made the same mistakes, and I'm not doing it again." Daniel moved closer, his voice gentle but firm. "I know you're used to handling everything alone, but you don't have to this time. Let me stay. Let me be here." "What about Patricia? What about your career?" "I'll figure it out. Maybe this isn't the right opportunity. Maybe there's another path." "You're throwing away everything you've worked for." "No, I'm choosing something different. There's a difference." Victoria looked at him with an expression that held too many emotions to parse. Gratitude and guilt, and something that might have been love if either of them were ready to acknowledge it. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for us?" "Because somewhere in the past 2 months, you and this baby stopped being an obligation and started being my future. Because when I imagine the next year of my life, you're in it. Because I'm falling for you and I don't know how to stop." But he couldn't say any of that, so he said the only truth he could manage, "Because showing up is what I do. It's all I know how to do." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks, and Daniel wiped them away with his thumb. Her skin was soft, her eyes bright with emotion, and for a moment the air between them felt electric with possibility. Then the moment shattered as Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. "What is it?" Daniel asked, fear spiking through him. "Nothing, just—" She kicked, really hard this time. Wonder replaced the fear on her face. "Feel." She took his hand and placed it on her abdomen. At first, Daniel felt nothing. Then, there, a flutter against his palm, gentle but unmistakable. Life. His daughter, moving and real and suddenly more present than she'd been in any ultrasound. "That's her," Victoria whispered, her hand covering his. "That's our daughter." Our daughter. Not the baby, not it, but our daughter, real and named and claimed by both of them. Daniel couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel that impossible flutter against his palm and understand with absolute clarity that there was no choice to make. Chicago didn't matter. His career didn't matter. Nothing mattered except being here for this. "I'm turning down Chicago," he said. "Daniel, I'm turning it down. Don't argue with me." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay. Okay. I'm learning to accept help. You're part of that help." She pressed his hand more firmly against her stomach. "Besides, she clearly wants you here. Another kick like that and I'll have bruised ribs." They stayed like that, his hand on her stomach, both of them waiting for another movement. When it came, they looked at each other and smiled, really smiled, the kind that reached their eyes and erased the careful distance they'd been maintaining. "What are we doing?" Victoria asked softly. "I have no idea. This is insane. Completely. But I don't want you to leave." "Then I won't." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and Daniel wrapped his arm around her, and they sat together feeling their daughter move between them. Outside, the June evening turned to dusk, and somewhere across the city Lily was probably driving their neighbor crazy with questions about baby names and nursery colors. His phone buzzed. "Marcus. Heard about Chicago. Please tell me you're not turning it down." Daniel typed back with one hand. "I'm turning it down." Are you insane? This is your career." "I know what I'm doing." "Do you? Because from here it looks like career suicide." Daniel looked at Victoria, at his hand still resting on her stomach, at the impossible future they were building. "Maybe. But some things matter more than careers." He silenced his phone before Marcus could respond and focused on the moment. Victoria's warmth against his side, the baby moving beneath his palm, the strange and terrifying sensation of falling toward something he couldn't control or predict. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly. "I know what this costs you. It's worth it. How can you be sure?" "Because I already lived through losing what matters most. I'm not making that mistake twice." They talked late into the night about logistics and practicalities, how they'd handle the birth, what arrangements needed to be made, whether they should find out the baby's sex definitively or trust Lily's sister instinct. Safe, practical topics that kept them from acknowledging the emotional undercurrent pulling them closer. But when Daniel finally left at 2 a.m, Victoria walked him to the door and hesitated before opening it. "This is complicated," she said. "I know. We don't know what we're doing." Also true. "But I'm glad you're here." Daniel touched her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Me too." He left before either of them could say anything more, but he felt the weight of everything unspoken following him home. The streets were empty, the city quiet, in that peculiar way it got in the small hours, and Daniel drove through the silence, thinking about choices and consequences and the strange architecture of the life he was building. The next day, he submitted his formal declination of the Chicago position and endured Patricia's disappointed lecture about missed opportunities. By afternoon, the entire office knew he'd turned down a career-making assignment, and the speculation about why ranged from reasonable to absurd. Marcus cornered him at his desk. "Are you sick? Is Lily sick? Because otherwise I cannot understand what you're thinking." "It's personal." Personal enough to tank your career?" Daniel looked at his friend, one of the few people who'd known Sarah, who understood what the past 2 years had cost him. "I'm going to be a father again in October, and I need to be here for that." Marcus's eyes went wide. Wait, what? With who?" "It's complicated." "No kidding. Does this have something to do with why you've been disappearing constantly?" Why you've been distracted for months. Yes. Marcus sat down heavily. Okay. Talk to me. What's going on? And because he needed to tell someone, because the weight of carrying this alone was crushing him, Daniel told Marcus everything. Chicago, the pregnancy, Victoria, the bed rest, the impossible choice that wasn't really a choice at all. When he finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're in love with her." What? No, it's not like that. Daniel, you're giving up a career-making opportunity to be present for the birth of a baby from a woman you're not dating. That's either love or insanity. It's responsibility. It's both. Marcus leaned back. Does she know? Know what? That you're in love with her. I'm not. Daniel stopped. Was he? Somewhere between grocery runs and midnight texts, between doctor's appointments and Lily's toenail painting sessions, had obligation transformed into something else? I don't know what I feel. I just know I need to be there. That's love, my friend. The showing up kind. The scary kind that doesn't make sense. Marcus smiled slightly. Sarah would approve. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. How can you say that? Because I knew her, and I know she wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life alone because you're afraid of dishonoring her memory. She'd want you to live, even if that means falling for someone new. Daniel couldn't respond. Couldn't process the idea that loving Victoria, if that's what this was, might not be a betrayal, but a continuation. That Sarah's ghost might not be haunting him, but releasing him. He went to Victoria's that evening, still tangled in confusion. She was on the couch with her laptop, looking guilty. I was just checking email, she said defensively. Not working, just checking. Sure. I wasn't, but she closed the laptop. How did Patricia take the news? About as well as expected. The whole office thinks I've lost my mind. Have you? Probably. Victoria patted the space beside her. Come here. He sat, and she immediately curled into his side, a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. Natural, right. I told Marcus, Daniel admitted, about us, about the baby. What did he say? That I'm in love with you. Victoria went very still. Are you? Daniel thought about Chicago, about turning down his career, about the past 2 months of showing up every single day, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. About the way his chest tightened when she smiled, the way he couldn't imagine the future without her in it. I don't know, he said honestly, but I know I don't want to be anywhere else. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it, I think I might be falling for you too. The confession hung between them, terrifying and impossible and completely true. That's a terrible idea, Daniel said. The worst. We barely know each other. We're having a baby together. I think we skipped over the normal getting to know you phase. This is going to get complicated. It's already complicated. Daniel turned to face her fully. So what do we do about it? Victoria's hand found his. Same thing we've been doing. Show up. Be honest. Figure it out as we go. Showing up scared? Always. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and tentative, a question rather than a demand. She kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his face, and for a moment everything else fell away. There was no Chicago, no fear, no complicated logistics. Just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate lives and decided to build something new. When they pulled apart, Victoria's eyes were bright. That was, yeah. So we're doing this? Whatever this is? I guess we are. This is insane. You keep saying that because it keeps being true. But she was smiling, and Daniel felt something in his chest expand. Hope, maybe, or possibility, or the first stirrings of joy he'd felt since Sarah's death. They spent the evening tangled together on the couch, talking about everything and nothing, and when Daniel finally left at midnight, he kissed her again at the door, longer this time, deeper, a promise of something they were both too scared to name but couldn't deny. The next 2 weeks unfolded in a blur of growing intimacy and terrifying possibility. They didn't define what they were to each other, didn't put labels on the relationship that was developing between doctor's appointments and dinner preparations. But Daniel found himself thinking about Victoria constantly, texting her at random moments, calling just to hear her voice, making excuses to stop by her apartment even when he didn't have a specific reason. Lily, with her uncanny perception, noticed immediately. "You like her," she announced one morning over breakfast. "Who?" "Victoria. You like her. Not just baby sharing like her." Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. It's complicated, Lil. Grown-ups always say things are complicated when they mean yes. Lily took a bite of cereal. "It's okay if you like her, Dad. I like her too. She's smart and she listens and she doesn't talk to me like I'm stupid." "She is those things." "So are you going to be boyfriend-girlfriend?" "I don't think grown-ups call it that." "What do you call it?" "I have no idea." Daniel set down his coffee. "How would you feel if Victoria and I were together? More than just co-parenting?" Lily considered this seriously. "Would she move in here?" "I don't know. We haven't talked about that." "Would you be happy?" "I think so, maybe." "Then I'd be happy too. That's how it works." Daniel pulled her into a hug. "When did you get so wise?" "I keep telling you, I've always been wise." But despite Lily's blessing and his own growing feelings, Daniel couldn't shake the fear that he was moving too fast, building too much on an unstable foundation. What if the stress of the baby broke them apart? What if Victoria went back to work and disappeared into her empire? What if he was setting himself up for another devastating loss? The fears followed him to Victoria's apartment that evening. She was waiting with dinner already prepared, a role reversal that made him smile despite his anxiety. "I cooked," she announced proudly. "Well, I assembled, but that counts." "It definitely counts. What's the occasion?" 28 weeks, viability plus. Dr. Reeves said the baby's growth is still slow but steady. We're officially in the safe zone. They ate the assembled salad and talked about the upcoming anatomy scan, but Daniel couldn't focus. Finally, Victoria set down her fork. "What's wrong? You've been distracted all evening." "I'm scared," he admitted. "Of what?" "That we're rushing this, that we're building something on a foundation that can't support it, that when the baby comes and reality hits, everything will fall apart." Victoria reached across the table and took his hand. "It might. We have no guarantees, but Daniel, I've spent 15 years building guarantees and security and control, and I was miserable. This, us, is terrifying because it's uncertain, but it's also the first thing that's felt real in longer than I can remember. What if I lose you? What if you don't? What if we actually make this work? Is that possible? I don't know, but I want to find out." Daniel looked at her, at this brilliant, complicated woman who'd chosen vulnerability over control, who'd let him see her scared and uncertain and human. And he realized Marcus was right. This was love. Messy and impossible and terrifying, but love nonetheless. "I'm all in," he said. "Whatever happens, I'm all in." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Me too." They moved to the couch, and Daniel held her while the baby moved between them, stronger now, more insistent. Their daughter, making her presence known, demanding space in a future neither of them could predict, but both were choosing to build anyway. "We're going to make so many mistakes," Victoria said against his chest. "Undoubtedly. And it's going to be hard." "Definitely. But we'll show up anyway?" "Always." Outside, summer rain started again, and Daniel closed his eyes and let himself believe in possibility, in second chances, in the strange and beautiful architecture of a life rebuilt from unexpected pieces. His phone buzzed. "Lily, are you staying at Victoria's? Might be late. Is that okay?" "It's okay. Tell her hi from me. And tell the baby I'm practicing lullabies." He showed Victoria the text, and she laughed, a real one, unguarded and bright. "Your daughter is determined to be the world's best big sister. She learned from the best mother." Victoria's expression softened. "Sarah would have liked Lily. She would have loved her. And she would have liked you too, I think. You're both stubborn and brilliant and terrible at asking for help. Is that your type?" "Apparently." They stayed up late talking about nursery colors and middle names and whether they were really ready for any of this. The answer was no, but they were doing it anyway, showing up scared and hoping love would be enough. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Daniel let himself believe it might be. The belief lasted exactly 3 more weeks. August arrived with oppressive heat that made the city feel like it was melting. Victoria was 34 weeks pregnant, still on strict bed rest, and increasingly restless despite Daniel's efforts to keep her occupied. The baby's growth had plateaued again, not declining but not progressing either, and Dr. Reeves had increased monitoring to 3 times per week. "I feel fine," Victoria insisted on the morning of what should have been a routine appointment. "Better than I have in weeks, actually." Daniel looked up from where he was packing the hospital bag Dr. Reeves had instructed them to keep ready. "That's good, but we're still going to the appointment." "I didn't say we shouldn't go. I just said I feel fine." But there was something in her voice, a forced brightness that made Daniel's instincts prickle with unease. He'd learned to read Victoria's subtle tells over the past months, the tiny cracks in her armor that signaled when she was hiding discomfort or fear. "Victoria," he said carefully, "are you sure you're okay?" "I'm sure. Stop hovering." They arrived at Dr. Reeves's office at 10, and the routine felt familiar now. Blood pressure check, weight, urine sample. The walk to the ultrasound room where they'd see their daughter moving on the screen. Except this time, the ultrasound tech's expression shifted from routine to concerned within seconds. "I'm going to get Dr. Reeves," she said, her tone carefully neutral. Victoria's hand found Daniel's immediately, her grip painful. "What's wrong?" "Just let me get the doctor." Dr. Reeves appeared within minutes, her professional mask firmly in place. She studied the ultrasound screen in silence, taking measurements, checking angles, her expression giving nothing away. The silence stretched until Daniel felt like he couldn't breathe. "The amniotic fluid is low," Dr. Reeves said finally, "significantly lower than it was on Friday, and the baby's showing signs of distress. Heart rate variability is concerning." "What does that mean?" Victoria asked, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. "It means we need to deliver. Today." The words hit like a physical blow. Daniel heard them, understood them, but his brain refused to process the implications. Today? 6 weeks early. Their daughter who was already measuring small and fragile. "She's not ready," Victoria said, and it came out like a plea. "She needs more time." "I know, but staying in utero is now more dangerous than being born. The placenta is failing, Victoria. If we wait, we risk losing her." Victoria made a sound that wasn't quite a sob, and Daniel pulled her close despite the awkward angle of the examination table. "What are her chances?" he asked, the pragmatic question cutting through the fear. "At 34 weeks, survival rate is over 95%. She'll need NICU time, probably several weeks. There may be complications, but she has a much better chance outside than in right now." "Okay," Victoria whispered. "Okay. When?" "I'm calling the surgical team now. We'll do a cesarean within the next 2 hours." Everything moved too fast after that. Victoria was admitted, prepped, and wheeled into pre-op while Daniel made frantic calls. Lily's school, his neighbor who'd agreed to emergency childcare, Marcus to cover his meetings. His hands shook as he typed out texts, his mind unable to focus on anything except Victoria's terrified face and the reality that in less than 2 hours, his daughter would be born 6 weeks too soon. Victoria's voice pulled him back. "Daniel." He looked up from his phone to find her watching him from the hospital bed, an IV already in her arm, her expression stripped of all pretense. "I'm scared," she said simply. He moved to her side and took her free hand. "I know. Me too. What if something goes wrong? What if she's not strong enough? Then we fight, together. But Victoria, she's your daughter. She's already spent 6 months fighting impossible odds. She's stubborn as hell. She gets that from you." A weak smile crossed Victoria's face. "I thought she got that from you. From both of us. Which means she's going to be fine." A nurse appeared to wheel Victoria to the operating room, and Daniel had to let go of her hand. "I'll be right here when you wake up," he promised. "With her?" "With her." They wheeled Victoria away, and Daniel was left standing in the empty pre-op room with his heart hammering and his mind racing through every terrible possibility. 34 weeks. NICU. Complications. The clinical words didn't capture the terror of imagining his daughter, his tiny, premature daughter, fighting for every breath. His phone rang. Lily, calling from their neighbor's apartment. "Dad, is it time? Is the baby coming?" "Yes, sweetheart, she's coming today." But it's too early. You said October. I know, but sometimes babies decide they're ready before we are. Is Victoria scared? Daniel's throat tightened. Yeah, Lil. We're all scared. Then you need to be brave for her, like Mom was brave for us, his 8-year-old daughter offering wisdom that felt beyond her years. You're right. I will be. Tell Victoria I love her, and tell the baby to hurry up so I can meet her. I will. I love you, Lil. Love you too, Dad. He hung up and sat in the waiting room watching the clock creep forward. 45 minutes. An hour. Each minute felt like an eternity, and Daniel's mind kept spiraling to dark places. Sarah's surgery, the moment they'd told him there was nothing more they could do, the terrible limbo of waiting for the inevitable. But this was different. This time, the outcome wasn't predetermined. This time, he had agency, presence, the ability to fight. Dr. Reeves appeared in the doorway at 11:30, still in her surgical scrubs, and Daniel's heart stopped. She's here, Doctor, Reeves said, and her expression was carefully neutral. 4 pounds, 2 ounces. Small, but breathing on her own with some assistance. The NICU team has her now. And Victoria? Surgery went well. She's in recovery. You can see her in about 20 minutes. Can I see the baby? Follow me. They walked through sterile corridors to the NICU, where Dr. Reeves stopped at a sink and showed Daniel how to scrub properly. Then they entered a space that looked more like a spaceship than a nursery. Monitors and incubators and beeping machines everywhere. Tiny babies in plastic boxes, fighting battles that should never be theirs. Dr. Reeves led him to an incubator in the corner. This is your daughter. Daniel looked down and felt his entire world contract to the size of the tiny person inside the clear box. She was impossibly small, smaller than any baby he'd ever seen, smaller than seemed possible for human life. Tubes and wires covered her fragile body. A CPAP mask dwarfed her face. Her skin was almost translucent, showing the delicate network of veins beneath. But her chest rose and fell, her tiny fists clenched and unclenched. She was alive and fighting. Can I touch her? Daniel asked, his voice breaking. You can put your hand through the port. Gentle touch only. Premature babies can be overstimulated easily. Daniel carefully reached through the opening in the incubator and laid his hand against his daughter's side. She was warm and fragile and impossibly perfect. At his touch, her heart rate on the monitor steadied slightly. She knows you, the NICU nurse said softly. They can recognize their parents' touch even this early. Daniel stood there with his hand on his daughter's impossibly tiny body and cried, for the fear and the love and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping this fragile life safe. She was here. She was breathing, but the road ahead looked impossibly long and terrifying. Does she have a name? The nurse asked. They'd discussed names but never decided. Victoria had wanted to wait until they met her. But looking at his daughter now, Daniel knew exactly who she was. Grace, he said. Her name is Grace. Because they needed grace, divine favor they didn't deserve, unmerited blessing in the midst of fear. Because she was a gift neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. Because her very existence felt like an act of grace. That's beautiful, the nurse said. Welcome to the world, Grace. Daniel stayed with her as long as they'd allow, talking to her softly through the plastic barrier, telling her about her big sister who couldn't wait to meet her, about her mother who was brave and strong and currently unconscious, but would fight tigers for her. You just have to keep breathing, he whispered. That's all you have to do right now. Breathe and grow and get strong. We'll handle everything else. When they finally pulled him away to let the medical team work, Daniel went to find Victoria. She was awake in recovery, her face pale and drawn, her hands trembling as she reached for him. The baby? She asked immediately. Grace. Her name is Grace, and she's beautiful and tiny and breathing. Victoria's face crumpled. I want to see her. Soon. They're getting her stabilized, but she's strong, Victoria. She's fighting. 4 pounds? 4 pounds, 2 ounces. Small, but mighty. Victoria closed her eyes, tears streaming down her temples. This is my fault. I should have rested more, eaten better, been... Stop. Daniel took her hands. This isn't your fault. You did everything right. Sometimes biology just doesn't cooperate. But Grace is here, she's alive, and now we fight together. I'm terrified. I know, but you don't have to be terrified alone. They wheeled Victoria to see Grace 3 hours later, after she'd recovered enough from the anesthesia. Daniel watched his partner see their daughter for the first time, watched the love and terror and fierce protectiveness wash over her face as she stared at the impossibly small person in the incubator. "She's perfect," Victoria whispered. "She is." "Can I hold her?" The nurse shook her head gently. "Not yet. She's too fragile right now, but you can touch her through the ports. Your touch will help her." Victoria reached through the opening with trembling hands and laid her palm against Grace's tiny body. The baby stirred slightly, and Victoria made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm your mama. I know this isn't what we planned, but you're here now, and we're going to take care of you. You just have to keep being brave." They stayed there for an hour, both of them touching Grace through the plastic barrier, talking to her in soft voices, while machines beeped and monitors displayed numbers neither of them fully understood. The NICU nurse explained the equipment patiently, the CPAP helping her breathe, the feeding tube because she was too small to nurse, the monitors tracking every vital sign. "The first 72 hours are critical," the nurse said. "We're watching for infections, respiratory distress, and bleeding in the brain, all common complications in premature babies, but so far she's doing better than expected for her gestational age." Better than expected. Daniel clung to those words like a lifeline. That evening, Victoria was moved to a recovery room, and Daniel divided his time between staying with her and checking on Grace in the NICU. At 6, he left the hospital long enough to pick up Lily from their neighbor's apartment. "Is she here? Can I see her?" Lily asked the moment he opened the door. "She's here, but she's in the NICU, a special nursery for babies who need extra help. You can't visit yet because of flu season, but I have pictures." He showed Lily the photos he'd taken on his phone and watched his daughter's face cycle through excitement, confusion, and concern. "She's really small," Lily said quietly. "She is. She came early, so she needs time to grow and get strong. Is she going to be okay?" Daniel thought about lying, about offering false reassurance. But Lily had lived through her mother's death. She knew that sometimes people didn't get better. "I don't know," he said honestly. "The doctors say she's doing well so far, but she has a long road ahead." Lily was quiet for a moment, studying the pictures. Then she said, "Can I make her something? Like a picture or a card, so she knows I'm thinking about her?" "I think that would be perfect." They went back to Victoria's apartment, where Lily immediately set to work creating an elaborate welcome card covered in hearts and stars, and carefully printed letters that said, "Welcome Grace, love, your big sister Lily." Daniel made dinner they barely touched. Then they returned to the hospital so Lily could meet Victoria. Victoria was sitting up in bed when they arrived, looking exhausted, but more composed than earlier. When she saw Lily, something in her expression softened. "Hi, Lily," she said. "Hi." Lily approached the bed cautiously, holding her card. "I made this for Grace. Can you give it to her?" Victoria took the card and her eyes filled with tears as she read it. "This is beautiful. She's going to love it. Is she okay? Dad showed me pictures, but she looks really small." "She is really small, but she's also really strong, just like you." Lily climbed onto the chair beside Victoria's bed. "Can you tell me about her? What does she look like for real?" And Victoria did, describing Grace's tiny features, her dark hair, the way she gripped their fingers when they touched her. Lily listened with rapt attention, asking questions about the tubes and machines and what Grace would be like when she came home. Daniel watched them together, his daughter and the woman who'd become so much more than just the mother of his child, and felt his heart expand with a complicated mix of love and grief and hope. This wasn't the family he'd planned, but it was the family he had, built from unexpected pieces and held together by choice rather than biology. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep on the uncomfortable hospital couch, and they'd convinced her to go home with the neighbor again, Daniel and Victoria sat together in the quiet of the recovery room. "I keep thinking about all the things I should have done differently," Victoria said quietly. "If I'd rested more, if I'd eaten better, if I'd..." You can drive yourself crazy with if, Daniel interrupted gently. Trust me, I'm an expert. After Sarah died, I spent months cataloging every moment I could have changed, every decision that might have made a difference. But it doesn't help. It just keeps you stuck. How did you stop? Lily, she needed me present, not drowning in guilt and what-ifs, so I learned to focus on what I could control instead of what I couldn't change. Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder. What can we control now? Being here. Showing up for Grace every single day, fighting for her, loving her. He paused. And trusting that our love is enough, even when everything else feels uncertain. Is it enough? It has to be. It's all we've got. They sat in silence for a while, the hospital's ambient sounds filling the space, beeping monitors, distant conversations, the hum of machinery keeping people alive. Finally, Victoria said, I need to see her again before I sleep, even just for a few minutes. Daniel helped her into a wheelchair. She wasn't cleared to walk yet, and pushed her down to the NICU. The night nurse let them in with a sympathetic smile, and they positioned the wheelchair beside Grace's incubator. Grace was sleeping, her tiny chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance. But she looked peaceful, not struggling, and the monitors showed stable vital signs. We're here, sweetheart, Victoria whispered, her hand through the port resting on Grace's body. Mama and Daddy are here. At the sound of her voice, Grace's heart rate steadied on the monitor. Such a small thing, but it felt like communication. Their daughter recognizing them, finding comfort in their presence even through plastic and tubes and medical equipment. She knows you, the nurse said softly. Keep talking to her. It helps. So they did. Victoria talked about the nursery they'd painted, about Lily's excitement to be a big sister, about the books they'd read, and the life that was waiting for Grace when she was strong enough to come home. Daniel added details about the apartment, about the park where they'd take her, about all the ordinary moments that felt impossibly distant from this medical reality. When they finally left the NICU after midnight, Victoria was crying again. I feel so helpless, she said as Daniel wheeled her back to the recovery room. I'm used to fixing things, but I can't fix this. I can't make her better, or stronger, or safer. No, but you can be here, and that matters more than you think. The next 72 hours were the longest of Daniel's life. He existed in a strange limbo between Victoria's recovery room and the NICU, barely sleeping, eating only when forced, his entire consciousness focused on Grace's monitors and the updates from the medical team. Day 1. Stable but still on CPAP, feeding tube in place. No signs of infection or brain bleeding. Small victories that felt enormous. Day 2. Breathing slightly improved. Still too weak to maintain body temperature on her own. Started phototherapy for mild jaundice. The NICU became Daniel's world. He learned to read the monitors, to understand the subtle changes in Grace's condition, to recognize which beeps meant problems and which were routine. Day 3. The critical threshold. Grace had made it 72 hours without major complications. The neonatologist called it encouraging and said they could cautiously proceed with optimism. Victoria was discharged on day 4, and leaving the hospital without Grace felt like abandonment, even though they returned 6 hours later for the next visiting window. They fell into a routine that felt both necessary and unsustainable. Arriving at the NICU at 8 in the morning, staying until they were forced to leave, going home to sleep a few hours, then returning. Lily came once, escorted by their neighbor, and stood outside the NICU windows to see her sister through the glass. She pressed her hand against the window and cried quietly, overwhelmed by the reality of Grace's fragility. When can I hold her? Lily asked Daniel that evening. When she's stronger, maybe a few weeks. That's so long. I know, but she's worth waiting for. Marcus visited on day 6, bringing coffee and sympathy and a reality check. You look terrible, he said bluntly. When did you last sleep more than 3 hours? I don't remember. Daniel, you can't sustain this. You'll collapse. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're running on fumes and desperation. Marcus's expression softened. I get it. I do. But Grace needs you to be functional, not destroyed. Take care of yourself so you can take care of her. I can't leave her. You're not leaving her. You're taking a break so you can be present when it matters. Marcus paused. Sarah would tell you the same thing. The invocation of Sarah's name hit hard. She would have told him the same thing, had told him the same thing during her illness, when he tried to be everywhere at once and ended up being present nowhere. That night, Daniel forced himself to sleep for 6 hours straight. When he woke, panicked that he'd missed something critical, he found a text from Victoria. Grace had a good night, stable vitals, get more sleep. She needs you rested. Week 2 brought improvements. Grace graduated from CPAP to a nasal cannula, less invasive breathing support. Her weight increased slowly but steadily. She started tolerating small amounts of breast milk through the feeding tube. The monitors showed a baby who was fighting and winning. She might be able to try nursing soon, the NICU nurse told Victoria on day 12. She's getting stronger. Victoria's face lit up with the first genuine joy Daniel had seen since the emergency delivery. Really? We'll start with kangaroo care first. Skin-to-skin contact. It helps regulate her temperature and heart rate, and it'll prepare her for breastfeeding. The first time Victoria held Grace skin-to-skin was on day 14. They carefully transferred the tiny baby from the incubator to Victoria's bare chest. Grace's body still covered in wires and tubes, but pressed against her mother's skin for the first time since birth. Grace settled immediately, her heart rate stabilizing, her breathing evening out. Victoria cried silently, her hand supporting Grace's fragile body, her expression a mixture of wonder and fierce protectiveness. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered. "Hi, sweetheart. Mama's got you." Daniel took pictures because he couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. This moment, Victoria holding their daughter for the first time, both of them peaceful and connected, felt like a turning point. Grace stayed on Victoria's chest for an hour, and when they finally put her back in the incubator, she cried for the first time loud enough for them to hear. Not the weak mewling she'd made before, but a proper infant cry that made Daniel laugh with relief. "She's got opinions," the nurse said, smiling. "That's a good sign." "She gets that from her mother," Daniel said, and Victoria swatted him weakly. By week 3, Grace had graduated to an open-air crib, no more incubator. She was maintaining her own body temperature, breathing well with minimal support, and gaining weight consistently. The medical team started talking about discharge planning, though they cautioned it would still be several weeks before Grace was strong enough to go home. Lily was finally allowed to visit, and Daniel watched his older daughter approach the NICU bassinet with reverent awe. "She's so tiny," Lily breathed. "Can I touch her?" "Gently," Victoria said, guiding Lily's hand to rest on Grace's chest. Grace's eyes opened. She was having more alert periods now, and seemed to study her big sister with serious focus. "Hi, Grace," Lily whispered. "I'm Lily. I'm your sister. I've been waiting forever to meet you." Grace's tiny hand wrapped around Lily's finger, and Lily gasped, "Dad, she's holding me." "She is. She knows you're important." "Can I tell her things? Like about school and my friends?" "She'd love that." And Lily did, launching into an elaborate story about her 3rd grade classroom and her best friend Emma and the art project they were working on. Grace listened with what appeared to be rapt attention, and the NICU nurse told them later that siblings' voices helped preemies develop. Week 4 brought the first successful breastfeeding attempt. Grace was still too small to get all her nutrition that way, but she latched properly and nursed for almost 10 minutes while Victoria cried happy tears. "She's doing it," Victoria said, amazed. "She's actually doing it." "Told you she was stubborn," Daniel said. "Best trait she could have inherited." They were building toward discharge, slowly, cautiously, with frequent setbacks and small victories. Grace had a few breathing scares that extended her NICU stay. She struggled with reflux that required medication adjustments, but overall the trajectory was positive. On week 5, the neonatologist called a meeting to discuss discharge planning. "Grace has exceeded our expectations," Dr. Martinez said. "She's breathing well on her own, feeding adequately, and maintaining her weight. Barring any setbacks, we're looking at discharge within the next 7 to 10 days. The news should have brought relief. Instead, Daniel felt a new wave of terror. "We take her home?" Victoria asked, her voice small. "What if something goes wrong?" "You'll have home monitors for her breathing and heart rate. A visiting nurse will check in 3 times a week initially. You'll have my number and the NICU's number for any concerns." Dr. Martinez smiled kindly. "I know it's scary, but Grace is ready, and you two are more than capable of taking care of her." We don't feel capable, Daniel admitted. No new parent does. But you've been here every day for 5 weeks. You know Grace's patterns, her needs, her signals. You're more prepared than most parents who bring home full-term babies. They spent the next week in preparation mode, attending CPR classes, learning to use the home monitors, meeting with the visiting nurse who'd oversee Grace's care. The NICU staff taught them everything they needed to know about feeding schedules, medication administration, and when to worry versus when to stay calm. Victoria moved through it all with the same intensity she'd once applied to board meetings, taking detailed notes, asking pointed questions, creating systems and schedules. Daniel recognized it as her way of managing fear, controlling what she could because so much remained uncertain. Finally, on September 28th, 5 weeks and 2 days after Grace's premature birth, they brought her home. She weighed 5 pounds, 8 ounces. Still small, still fragile, but healthy enough to leave the controlled environment of the NICU. They dressed her in a newborn outfit that hung loosely on her tiny frame, loaded her into a car seat that looked absurdly large, and drove home through late September sunshine with their hearts in their throats. Lily was waiting on the steps of Victoria's building, practically vibrating with excitement. Their neighbor had helped her make a Welcome Home Grace banner that stretched across the living room. "She's here!" Lily shouted. "Can I hold her now?" "Let's get inside first," Victoria said, but she was smiling, the first real smile Daniel had seen in weeks. They settled on the couch together, all 4 of them, Lily holding Grace with careful reverence while Daniel and Victoria supervised corrected hand positions and marveled at how perfect this impossible moment was. "I waited so long for this," Lily said softly. "Hi, Grace. Welcome home." Grace looked up at her big sister with unfocused eyes that were already starting to show hints of gray. She made a small sound that might have been contentment or gas, and Lily laughed with pure joy. Daniel watched his family, assembled from grief and recklessness and desperate choices made in the dark, and felt something shift in his chest. This was it. This was what he'd been fighting for through all the fear and chaos. Not perfection, not the life he'd planned, but this messy, complicated, beautiful reality. Victoria met his eyes across their daughters, and he saw his own emotions reflected there, terror and love and overwhelming gratitude that they'd made it to this moment. "We did it," she mouthed. "We did," he agreed. Grace fell asleep in Lily's arms, peaceful and safe and home at last. Grace came home on a Thursday afternoon in early November, when the autumn light slanted gold through Victoria's living room windows and made everything look like a promise. She weighed 6 pounds, 3 ounces, small but fierce, with Daniel's dark hair and what the nurses swore would be Victoria's gray eyes once the newborn blue faded. Daniel carried the car seat through the door while Victoria hovered anxiously behind him, her movements still careful after the emergency cesarean 2 weeks earlier. Lily practically vibrated with excitement, having been banned from the hospital for the past 14 days due to flu season restrictions. "She's so tiny," Lily breathed, peering into the car seat with reverent wonder. "Can I hold her?" "Wash your hands first," Daniel said automatically, and watched his older daughter sprint to the bathroom with more enthusiasm than she'd ever shown for hygiene before. Victoria sank onto the couch, exhaustion and relief written across her face in equal measure. The past 2 weeks had been a blur of NICU visits, pumping schedules, and the particular terror of watching their daughter fight for every breath through tubes and monitors. But Grace had proven as stubborn as both her parents, gaining weight steadily, breathing on her own, and finally, deemed strong enough to come home. "I can't believe she's really here," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me we can't take her yet." Daniel sat beside her and took her hand. "She's ours. We get to keep her. What if I do something wrong? What if I—" "Victoria," he squeezed her hand. "We're going to do lots of things wrong. That's parenting, but we'll figure it out together." Lily returned, hands scrubbed pink, and Daniel carefully lifted Grace from the car seat. She was awake, her unfocused eyes trying to make sense of the bright world around her, one tiny fist waving in the air. "Support her head," Daniel coached as Lily settled into the corner of the couch. "Just like we practiced with the doll." He placed Grace in Lily's arms, and his older daughter's face transformed with pure joy. "Hi, Grace. I'm your big sister. I've been waiting for you forever." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, a common occurrence these days. Her hormones still regulating, her emotions raw and unguarded in ways she'd never allowed before. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her close, and they watched their daughters together, one teaching the other how to exist in this overwhelming world. "She's perfect," Lily whispered. "Can I tell her about Mom? About how she would have loved her?" Daniel's throat tightened. "Of course you can." "Mom was really brave," Lily said softly to Grace, who blinked solemnly as if she understood. "And she loved Dad so much. I think she'd be happy he found Victoria, and she'd definitely love you because you're part of our family now." Victoria made a small sound, and Daniel held her tighter. They'd talked about Sarah often over the past months. How to honor her memory while building something new. How to help Lily understand that loving Victoria didn't mean forgetting her mother. It was complicated and messy and sometimes painful, but they were navigating it together. The first night home was chaos. Grace cried every 2 hours, her tiny lungs surprisingly powerful. Victoria struggled with breastfeeding despite the lactation consultant's detailed instructions. Daniel changed diapers with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this before while simultaneously trying to reassure Victoria that no, the baby wasn't dying, she was just hungry and angry about it. At 3 a.m, Victoria sat in the nursery's glider chair, the one Daniel and Lily had picked out together, painted soft yellow because they'd all agreed pink felt too predictable, and cried while Grace nursed. "I'm terrible at this," she said when Daniel appeared in the doorway with water and a granola bar. "She knows I don't know what I'm doing. She's 2 weeks old. She doesn't know anything except that she's hungry and you have food." He sat on the floor beside the glider. "You're doing great." "I'm not. Look at me. I built a billion-dollar company, and I can't figure out how to feed my own daughter without crying." "You're exhausted. You had major surgery. Your hormones are everywhere. And this is hard. It's supposed to be hard." Grace finished nursing and immediately spit up on Victoria's shirt. Victoria stared at the mess like it was a personal failure, and Daniel couldn't help but laugh. "It's not funny," Victoria said, but a smile tugged at her lips despite everything. "It's a little funny. Here, give her to me. Go change." He took Grace and walked her around the nursery, patting her back until she burped impressively. "That's my girl. Get it all out." When Victoria returned in a clean shirt, she found him swaying with Grace, humming something that might have been a lullaby. The baby had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her tiny mouth open, completely peaceful. "How do you make it look so easy?" Victoria asked. "Practice. And lowered expectations. I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm just trying to keep her alive and relatively clean." "Is that really all we're aiming for?" "For now, yes. Everything else is bonus." Victoria came to stand beside him, studying their daughter's sleeping face. "She looks like you when she sleeps. Same expression." "Poor kid." "I think it's beautiful." Victoria touched Grace's cheek gently. "I can't believe we made her. Technically, we made her in Chicago after too many drinks and not enough sleep." "Romantic." "Accurate." Daniel shifted Grace carefully. "But look at her. Best decision we ever made, even if it was an accident." Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder, and they stood together in the quiet nursery, watching their daughter sleep. Outside, the city was beginning to wake, delivery trucks rumbling, early commuters heading to the subway. But inside this room, time felt suspended, held in the space between one breath and the next. "Thank you," Victoria whispered. "For what?" "For not letting me run. For showing up even when I tried to push you away. For teaching me what it means to choose someone." "You did the same for me." "I was stuck, Victoria. After Sarah died, I was just going through the motions. You made me want to actually live again." "By getting accidentally pregnant?" "By being brave enough to need help. By letting me be there." Grace stirred but didn't wake, and Daniel carried her to the bassinet beside Victoria's bed. They stood watching her for a moment, both terrified and awed by the responsibility sleeping peacefully before them. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm of controlled chaos. Victoria struggled with the loss of control that came with new motherhood, the inability to plan, to schedule, to predict. But slowly, she learned to adapt, to nurse Grace while reading reports one-handed, to accept that sometimes the baby cried and there was no reason or solution, just presence and patience, to ask for help when she needed it, instead of pretending she had everything handled. Daniel watched her transform from the woman who'd commanded boardrooms with icy precision into someone softer, but no less strong. She was learning, just as he'd promised she would, and it was beautiful to witness. Lily appointed herself Grace's primary protector and entertainment director. She read to her baby sister constantly, performed elaborate puppet shows, and provided running commentary on everything happening in the apartment. Grace responded with focused attention that might have been comprehension or might have been gas, but Lily took it as deep sisterly connection either way. "She smiled at me," Lily announced one afternoon in early December. "A real smile, not just gas." "She's too young to smile socially," Victoria said from the couch, where she was attempting to work one-handed while Grace slept on her chest. "Tell that to Grace. She definitely smiled." Daniel looked up from his laptop where he was reviewing the quarterly analysis he'd promised Patricia he'd finish from home. He'd negotiated a permanent remote arrangement after declining Chicago, taking a slight pay cut in exchange for flexibility. It wasn't the trajectory he'd planned, but it was the one that let him be present for everything that mattered. "Babies smile when they're passing gas," he said diplomatically. "But I'm sure Grace appreciates your interpretation." "You're both wrong. She smiled because I'm hilarious." Victoria caught Daniel's eye and smiled herself. Not gas, but genuine amusement. He smiled back and something passed between them that felt like contentment. Not perfect, not easy, but real. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed and Grace was sleeping in her bassinet, Daniel found Victoria standing at the window looking out at the city lights. "Can't sleep?" he asked, coming up behind her. "Too wired. My brain won't shut off." Thinking about work?" "Actually, no. Thinking about us." She turned to face him. "We never talked about what happens next. Are you going to move in here? Are we going to find somewhere together? What are we doing, Daniel?" He'd been wondering the same thing. They'd been operating in crisis mode for months. Pregnancy complications, premature birth, NICU stays. But now Grace was home and healthy, and they had to figure out what their actual life looked like. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you here. Both of you. I want Lily's books on my shelves and Grace's toys on my floor and your terrible coffee pods in my kitchen." She smiled. "I want the mess, the noise, the life. This place is too small for 4 people. Then we find somewhere bigger, together." "Are you sure? That's a big step." "I'm terrified, but I'm sure." Victoria took his hands. "I spent 15 years alone because I thought that's what success looked like. But this, what we've built over the past 7 months, this is what actually matters. I don't want to do it separately anymore." Daniel pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "Okay, then we find a place, something with space for all of us. And we figure out how to be a family. A really weird family. The best kind." They started looking at apartments the next week. Places in Brooklyn with yards for Lily and bedrooms for everyone and kitchens large enough to contain the chaos of their combined lives. It was strange and wonderful walking through empty rooms and imagining their future filling them. "This could be Lily's room," Victoria would say, pointing to a space with good light. "And this one for Grace. And this could be your office. You need somewhere quiet to work." "What about you? You're going back eventually, right?" Victoria had been on leave for 6 months, and the board was getting restless. But she'd discovered something during her forced sabbatical. She didn't actually want to run Hayes Capital the way she had before. The 70-hour weeks, the all-consuming focus, the belief that her worth came from her productivity, it all felt empty now. "I'm thinking about restructuring," she admitted as they toured a brownstone in Park Slope, "bringing in a president to handle day-to-day operations. I'll stay as CEO, but focus on strategy and big-picture decisions. Maybe 30 hours a week instead of 70. Will the board accept that?" "They'll have to. I'm the majority shareholder." She smiled. "Besides, I've already proven I can step back without the company collapsing. Jeffrey's been doing a great job as acting CEO. Maybe it's time to let other people lead while I actually live my life." "That's a big change. So is everything else about the past year. Might as well keep the momentum going." They put in an offer on the Park Slope brownstone that same day. 4 bedrooms, a backyard, walking distance to Lily's school. It was more space than they needed and more expensive than Daniel could afford on his own. But Victoria insisted they were partners in this, and that meant sharing everything equally. "I make more than you," she said bluntly when Daniel tried to argue about the financial split. "That's just reality. But we're building this life together, so we contribute what we can. You contribute your time and presence and patience. I contribute money. It's all valuable. That doesn't seem fair to you." "Fair is both of us getting what we need. I need you here, being present, not working 80 hours to keep up financially. You need to not resent me for having more money." So we find a balance that works. They moved in January, when Grace was 3 months old and starting to sleep in 4-hour stretches. Lily claimed the bedroom with the window seat immediately, declaring it perfect for reading. Grace got the room next to theirs, close enough that Victoria could hear every sound through the baby monitor, but far enough that they had some privacy. Daniel set up his office in the converted attic space, and Victoria commandeered the formal dining room for the home office she'd use for her reduced hours. The first night in the new house, they ordered pizza and sat on the floor of the empty living room because their furniture hadn't been delivered yet. Lily entertained Grace with elaborate shadow puppets on the walls, and Victoria leaned against Daniel's shoulder, exhausted but happy. "This is insane," she said, echoing the refrain that had followed them through their entire relationship. "We met less than a year ago. We barely knew each other, and now we're living together with 2 kids and a mortgage. Are you having second thoughts?" "Not even for a second." She turned to look at him. "Are you?" Daniel thought about Sarah, about the life he'd planned and lost, about the 2 years of grief and survival that had followed, about the impossible night in Chicago that had led to this moment, sitting on a bare floor with the woman he loved and the family they'd built from chaos and courage. "No second thoughts," he said. "Just gratitude that you were as reckless as I was that night." "Best mistake of my life." "Mine too." Lily looked over from where she was entertaining Grace. "Are you guys being mushy again? Because Grace and I are trying to have puppet theater over here." "Sorry," Daniel said, smiling. "Continue your performance." As Lily resumed her show and Grace watched with intense baby focus, Victoria whispered, "I love you. I know I haven't said it yet, but I do." Daniel's heart expanded. "I love you too. Have for months, even when I was too scared to admit it." "Scared of what?" "That loving someone new meant betraying Sarah's memory, that I'd lose you like I lost her, that I didn't deserve another chance at happiness. And now I think Sarah would be happy I found you, that life is too short to waste on fear, that we all deserve as much happiness as we can grab." They kissed, gentle and certain and full of promise, while Lily made exaggerated gagging sounds and Grace fell asleep mid-puppet show. The next few months were an education in blended chaos. Lily adjusted to having a baby sister with the resilience of someone who'd already navigated bigger losses. Grace grew from a fragile preemie into a thriving baby with strong opinions about everything. Victoria returned to work on a reduced schedule and discovered she was actually more effective when she wasn't exhausted and resentful. Daniel found his groove balancing remote work with active parenting, becoming the steady center around which everyone else orbited. They fought, of course, about division of labor and parenting styles and whose turn it was to deal with the 3 a.m. feeding. But they also learned to fight productively, to apologize genuinely, to choose each other even when it was hard. In March, when Grace was 5 months old, and spring was teasing the city with occasional warm days, Victoria's mother called. "She wants to meet Grace," Victoria said after hanging up, her voice carefully neutral. "She says she's been thinking about what I said, that she wants to try." "What do you want?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to tell her it's too late, but another part—" She looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her bouncer. "Another part thinks Grace deserves to know her grandmother, even if that grandmother is complicated. Then we try, cautiously, with boundaries." They met at a neutral restaurant, and Daniel watched Victoria's walls go up the moment her mother walked through the door. Elizabeth Hayes was exactly what he'd expected. Polished, professional, radiating the same controlled intensity that Victoria had possessed before learning to soften. "She's beautiful," Elizabeth said, studying Grace with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. "She looks like you did as a baby." "Thank you." Victoria's voice was stiff, formal. "And you must be Daniel. And this is Lily?" "Yes, ma'am," Lily said politely, her hand tight in Daniel's. The lunch was awkward, full of careful small talk and topics they all avoided. But toward the end, Elizabeth said something that made Victoria's careful composure crack. "I was wrong," Elizabeth said abruptly. "When you came to see me while you were pregnant, I was wrong to say you were making a mistake." Victoria set down her water glass carefully. "What changed your mind?" "I've been watching the company. Jeffrey told me you've restructured your role, that you're working reduced hours. I expected Hayes Capital to suffer. Instead, it's thriving." "So you approve because the company didn't collapse?" "No." Elizabeth looked uncomfortable, perhaps the first genuine emotion Daniel had seen from her. "I approve because you look happy. You were brilliant before, Victoria, but you were also hollow. And now you're not." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I never thought I'd hear you say that. I was a terrible mother. I prioritized all the wrong things. I taught you that love was conditional on achievement." Elizabeth glanced at Grace. "I don't want to make the same mistakes with my granddaughter. If you'll let me be part of her life, I promise to try to be different." "I can't promise it'll be easy," Victoria said. "We have a lot of history to work through." "I know, but I'd like to try, if you're willing." Victoria looked at Daniel and he nodded, cautiously, with boundaries, but they could try. "Okay," Victoria said, "we can try." It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. Elizabeth was still difficult, still judgmental, still too focused on achievement. But she showed up for Grace's 6-month photos. She sent thoughtful gifts instead of expensive but impersonal ones. She even apologized, awkwardly but genuinely, for the ways she'd failed Victoria as a mother. "People can change," Victoria said one night after her mother had visited and actually complimented their parenting. "Not easily, not completely, but enough." "Maybe that's enough." "Maybe it is," Daniel agreed. In May, on a Saturday afternoon, when the brownstone was full of sunshine and Lily's laughter, Daniel found Victoria in the nursery, watching Grace sleep. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "About how none of this was supposed to happen. How I was supposed to be alone and focused and successful in all the ways that don't actually matter." "Regrets?" "Not even one." She turned in his arms to face him. "But I was thinking, maybe we should make this official." "Official how?" Victoria pulled a small box from her pocket, and Daniel's breath caught. "I know I'm supposed to wait for you to ask," she said, "but I've never been good at following traditional rules. Daniel Brooks, will you marry me?" Daniel started laughing, surprised and delighted and completely overwhelmed. "You're proposing to me? Is that a problem?" "Not even slightly." He took the box and opened it to find a simple platinum band. "But I should warn you, I already bought a ring. I was planning to ask you next month on our 1-year anniversary of that first ultrasound." "So that's a yes?" "That's the most enthusiastic yes you'll ever hear." He kissed her, long and deep and full of promise. "Yes, absolutely yes." They got married in August, in the backyard of their brownstone, with Lily as maid of honor and Grace as the world's youngest and least cooperative flower girl. It was small and intimate. Marcus and his wife, a few close friends from Victoria's executive team, Elizabeth, who actually cried during the vows, and Jeffrey, who'd become an unexpected friend during Victoria's leave. Victoria wore a simple cream dress, and Daniel wore the suit Lily had helped pick out. They wrote their own vows, honest and unpolished and perfect. "I promised to show up scared," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. "To choose you every day, even when it's hard. To build a life that's messy and real and nothing like what I planned. To love you and Lily and Grace with everything I have." "I promise to let you in," Daniel said, holding both her hands. "To believe in second chances. To honor the past while building the future. To love you not because you're perfect, but because you're perfectly you." Lily stood beside them, with Grace in her arms, and when the officiant pronounced them married, she cheered so loudly that Grace started crying. Everyone laughed, and Daniel kissed his wife while their daughters created chaos around them, and it was absolutely perfect. That night, after the guests had left and the girls were asleep, Daniel and Victoria sat on the back porch watching the stars emerge over Brooklyn. "Mrs. Brooks," Daniel said, testing out the name. "I'm keeping Hayes professionally," Victoria reminded him, "but I like hearing you say it. Are you happy?" deliriously, exhaustedly, completely. She leaned her head on his shoulder. A year ago, I was alone in a sterile apartment, convinced I was happy because I was successful. Now I'm married to a man I barely knew, living in a house that's always messy, sharing my life with two daughters who need me more than any board ever did. And I've never been happier. Same. I thought my great love story was over. Turns out, I got two. What would Sarah think of all this? Daniel had wondered that often, but tonight the answer came clearly. I think she'd be happy I found my way back to living, that I didn't let fear keep me stuck, that Lily has a sister and a mother figure who loves her. He paused. And I think she'd like you. You're both stubborn and brilliant and terrible at accepting help. You have a type, apparently. But you're also different. With Sarah, everything was planned. We built our life brick by brick exactly as we designed it. With you, everything is chaos and improvisation and figuring it out as we go. Is that better or worse? It's perfect. It's exactly what I needed, to learn that life doesn't have to be controlled to be beautiful. That sometimes the best things are the ones you never saw coming. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then said, I want to tell you something about Chicago, about that night. You don't have to. I want to. I was there because I just closed a deal that should have made me happy. But all I felt was empty. I went to the bar to hide from a networking event I didn't want to attend, and then you sat down next to me. I remember. You looked furious at the world. I was. But then you started talking, and you were honest about your grief instead of giving me corporate platitudes. You made me feel like a human instead of a machine. And for one night, I let myself want something just because I wanted it, not because it served some strategic purpose. Best decision of my life, Daniel said. Mine too. I didn't know it then, but that night changed everything. Not just because of Grace, but because it reminded me that I was still capable of feeling something real. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling into night. Inside, their daughters slept, Lily dreaming of whatever 8-year-olds dreamed about, Grace peaceful in her crib. We should go to bed, Victoria said eventually. Grace will be up in 3 hours demanding food. Or we could stay out here and steal a few more minutes of peace. Steal them from what? We have the rest of our lives. The rest of our lives. The phrase settled over Daniel like a benediction. After 2 years of believing his future was just survival, he had a future that included joy and chaos and love and second chances. They went inside together, checking on both girls before heading to their own room. Grace was sleeping with her arms above her head, the picture of infant contentment. Lily had kicked off her blankets and was sprawled sideways across her bed, a book open beside her. She fell asleep reading again, Victoria whispered, carefully removing the book and pulling the blankets up. She gets that from you now. You both fall asleep reading. It's a good trait to share. They stood in the doorway watching Lily sleep, this brilliant girl who'd lost her mother and found room in her heart for another one, who'd embraced Grace with fierce devotion and made their blended family feel natural instead of forced. Thank you, Victoria said softly. For what? For sharing her with me. For letting me be part of her life. You're not part of her life, Victoria. You're family. There's a difference. In their bedroom, they fell into bed exhausted but content. Victoria curled into Daniel's side, her head on his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her and thought about the strange journey that had brought them here. A conference in Chicago. One night of honesty and attraction. 5 words that changed everything. I'm pregnant. It's yours. And then the choice to show up, to stay, to build something beautiful from chaos and fear and courage. I love you, Victoria murmured, already half asleep. I love you too. Daniel lay awake a while longer, listening to his wife breathe and the sounds of his daughters sleeping safely down the hall. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy, and inside, his heart felt full in a way he'd forgotten was possible. He'd thought his story ended the day Sarah died. But stories didn't end. They just transformed into new chapters, new possibilities, new adventures. Sarah's death wasn't an ending, but a transition. And this, Victoria and Grace and their blended family, wasn't a replacement, but an expansion. His heart had simply grown large enough to hold both the past he'd loved and the future he was building. Grace cried at 2:30, right on schedule. Daniel felt Victoria stir beside him, but he kissed her forehead and said, "I've got this one. Sleep." He walked down the hall to the nursery where his youngest daughter was working herself into a proper rage, her face red and indignant. Daniel picked her up and she immediately calmed, her tiny fist gripping his shirt. "Hey, Gracie girl," he whispered, settling into the glider chair. "Let's let Mama sleep, okay? You and me, we'll handle this." He fed her the bottle Victoria had prepared, and Grace drank greedily, her eyes locked on his face with that intense baby focus that made everything else in the world disappear. When she finished, she gave him her version of a smile, one that might have been gas, but he chose to believe was real. "You know what?" he said softly, burping her against his shoulder. "Your big sister was right. You do smile, and you're pretty great at it." Grace burped impressively, and Daniel laughed quietly. "That's my girl. Get it all out." He rocked her gently, humming the same lullaby he'd sung to Lily as a baby, and thought about how life had a way of surprising you when you stopped trying to control it. How love could find you in hotel bars and ultrasound rooms and midnight feedings. How family could be built from the strangest materials, grief and recklessness and courage and hope. Grace fell asleep against his shoulder, warm and trusting and perfect. Daniel sat with her a while longer, not ready to put her down, wanting to hold on to this moment. These were the moments Sarah had treasured, the quiet ones, the middle-of-the-night ones, when it was just parent and child and love so fierce it felt like it could stop time. "Your big sister loved these moments," he whispered to Grace. "She'd want you to know that. She'd want you to know that love doesn't run out or get divided. It just multiplies. You being here doesn't take anything away from Lily or from Sarah's memory. You just make our hearts bigger." He finally put Grace back in her crib and stood watching her sleep, this tiny person who'd arrived early and scared and had to fight for every breath. Now she was thriving, growing, becoming exactly who she was meant to be. Back in bed, Victoria had shifted to his side and Daniel carefully slid in beside her. She woke enough to ask, "Grace okay?" "Perfect. Fed and happy and sleeping like the angel she absolutely isn't during the day." Victoria smiled without opening her eyes. "She gets that from you. Sweet at night, stubborn during the day." "I'm not stubborn. I'm persistent. That's what stubborn people call themselves." He pulled her close and she melted against him, already drifting back to sleep. And Daniel lay there in the darkness, listening to his wife breathe and thinking about the impossible architecture of their life. A year ago, he'd stood in Victoria's office and heard 5 words that terrified him. Now those words felt like a gift, the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. Sometimes the best stories weren't the ones you planned. Sometimes they were the ones that happened when you stopped trying to control the narrative and just showed up, scared and uncertain and willing to believe that love might be enough. Morning came too early, as it always did with an infant in the house. Lily was the first one up, padding into their room at 6:30 to announce that Grace was awake and probably needed them. "Or I could get her," Lily offered. "I know how to change diapers now. Dad taught me." "That's okay, sweetheart," Victoria said, already climbing out of bed. "But thank you for offering." Daniel followed them to the nursery where Grace was entertaining herself by staring at the mobile above her crib, tracking the movement with intense focus. When she saw them, her whole face lit up. Definitely not gas, definitely real joy. "Morning, Gracie," Lily said, leaning over the crib rail. "Did you sleep good? I dreamed about horses. Do you dream yet?" "Dad says babies don't dream, but I think you probably do." They moved through the morning routine together, Grace fed and changed, Lily making breakfast with more enthusiasm than skill, Victoria checking emails while drinking coffee, Daniel packing Lily's school lunch and reviewing his meeting schedule. It was chaotic and imperfect, and absolutely ordinary. And it was everything. At 8:15, Daniel walked Lily to school, while Victoria got ready for her reduced day at the office. Grace stayed with the nanny they'd hired, a kind woman named Rosa who'd raised 4 children of her own and treated Grace like she was precious cargo. "Dad," Lily said as they walked through the tree-lined streets of Park Slope, "are you happy?" "Very happy. Why?" "Just checking. You smile more now than you used to. Before Victoria and Grace, I mean." Daniel thought about the 2 years after Sarah's death, when smiling had felt like a betrayal. "I do smile more, Because I have more reasons to smile. Do you still miss Mom? Every single day. But missing her doesn't mean I can't also be happy. Those feelings can exist together. Lily considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Good, because I miss her too, but I also really love our family now. And I didn't want that to be wrong. Daniel stopped walking and knelt down to his daughter's level. It's not wrong, Lil. It's actually exactly right. Mom would want us to be happy. She'd want us to love Victoria and Grace and build a beautiful life. That's not betraying her memory. That's honoring it by choosing to keep living fully. Okay, Lily hugged him tight. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. They finished the walk to school, and Daniel watched Lily disappear into the building before heading back home. Victoria was just leaving for the office, professional and polished in a way that still sometimes surprised him given how she looked at 3 in the morning covered in spit-up. Meeting at 10, she said, kissing him quickly. Home by 3. Rosa has my number if Grace needs anything. We'll be fine. Grace and I are going to have important discussions about investment strategies and why she should sleep longer than 3 hours at a stretch. Good luck with that second one. She's stubborn. Wonder where she gets it. Victoria smiled, and Daniel saw both versions of her in that moment. The CEO, who commanded boardrooms, and the mother who'd spent the night nursing their daughter. Both powerful, both real, both his. I love you, he said. I love you too. Don't let Grace convince you she needs to eat every hour. Rosa says she's starting to manipulate us. 6-month-olds can't manipulate. You clearly don't know our daughter. She left, and Daniel returned to the quiet house where Rosa was doing Grace's morning tummy time in the living room. His daughter looked up at him with recognition and joy, her whole body wiggling with excitement. This was his life now. Not the one he'd planned, not the one he'd lost, but the one he'd built from unexpected pieces. And it was beautiful, messy, and chaotic and imperfect, but beautiful nonetheless. That evening, they all gathered for dinner, Victoria home early as promised, Lily full of stories about school, Grace in her high chair gumming a teething biscuit and making a spectacular mess. It was loud and chaotic, and exactly what Daniel had never known he needed. I have news, Victoria said during a brief lull in the chaos. The board approved my restructuring proposal. Jeffrey's being promoted to president. I'm staying on as CEO, but officially reducing to 30 hours a week. How do you feel about that? Daniel asked. Terrified, relieved, excited. She looked at Grace, who chose that moment to throw her biscuit on the floor. Like I'm making the right choice for the first time in years. You are, Daniel assured her. We should celebrate, Lily announced. With ice cream, definitely ice cream. They walked to the neighborhood ice cream shop after dinner. Grace bundled in her stroller, Lily skipping ahead, Daniel and Victoria walking hand in hand behind them. It was a perfect late summer evening, the kind that made you believe in possibility and second chances and the goodness of ordinary moments. This is it, Victoria said quietly as they walked. This is what I was missing for all those years. Ice cream? Connection, purpose beyond achievement, love that asks for nothing except showing up. Daniel squeezed her hand. Was it worth it? All the fear and chaos and uncertainty? Every single second. She stopped walking and turned to face him. You saved my life, Daniel Brooks. Not from anything dramatic, from emptiness, from becoming my mother, from believing that success and love were mutually exclusive. You saved mine too. From being stuck, from thinking my story was over, from forgetting that life is supposed to be lived, not just survived. They kissed while Lily made exaggerated gagging sounds and Grace babbled approval from her stroller, and everything was perfect in its imperfection. Later that night, after the girls were asleep and the house was finally quiet, Daniel and Victoria sat on their back porch under the stars. What are you thinking about? Victoria asked. About how life surprises you. How you can plan and control and try to predict everything, and then someone sits down next to you in a hotel bar and changes your entire trajectory. Regretting that drink? Not for a single second. He pulled her closer. Best whiskey of my life. It was bourbon. Whatever it was, it led to this, to you, to Grace, to everything. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then said, I want to tell Grace about that night someday. Not the details, obviously, But the truth, that she came from an unexpected moment between two people who were both lost in different ways. That she wasn't planned, but she was wanted the moment we knew about her. She'll love that story, especially the part where you proposed to me. Someone had to. You were taking forever. I had a timeline. I was being romantic. You were being slow. They laughed, and the sound carried across the quiet backyard. Inside, their daughters slept. Around them, the neighborhood settled into night, and Daniel felt, for the first time since Sarah's death, completely at peace. His life looked nothing like what he'd planned. It was better, richer, fuller, more complicated, and more beautiful than anything he could have designed. Because the best things in life weren't planned. They were chosen, every single day, in 1,000 small moments of courage and love and showing up even when you were terrified. "I'm glad you sat down next to me," Victoria said softly. "I'm glad you let me stay. I'm glad we were both brave enough to build this." "Me too." They sat under the stars, hand in hand, and thought about the impossible journey that had brought them here. From Chicago to New York, from strangers to partners, from fear to love, from loss to hope. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. Messy and complicated and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. And as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Daniel Brooks closed his eyes and thought about beginnings and endings and the beautiful chaos in between. His great love story with Sarah had ended, but another one had begun. Not as a replacement, but as proof that the human heart was infinite in its capacity to love, to hope, to choose joy, even in the midst of grief. 5 words had changed everything. "I'm pregnant. It's yours." And he'd responded with 5 words of his own. "No child of mine alone." From that moment, everything had aligned. Not easily, not perfectly, but inevitably. 2 people learning to show up scared, to build something beautiful from chaos, to believe that love was enough even when nothing else made sense. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.